And it looks like we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to yet another Hangout. I know it's been a while since I've made a Hangout like this with a Flat Earther as a guest, but yeah, I got a new one. So, hi, Flat Earth Aussie Jesus. How are you?
I'm going good. How are you going? Alex, do I call you, or
Yeah,
Geostrieber?
Alex is fine. How shall I
Yep.
call you?
You can just call me Ross. That works for me.
Ross. Okay. So, for the people who are not familiar with you, why don't you just introduce yourself for maybe a minute or two and tell yourself a little bit about you and what your beliefs are regarding the shape of the planet?
Yeah, no worries. Well, first of all, I don't believe it's a planet. That's goes without saying. I used to be very much into the whole idea of us living on the outside surface of a spinning ball hurtling through space. But as I got sort of older and wiser and slowly looked into more and more things that started to not make sense, I started to realize, well, actually, yeah, it doesn't really make sense that water can conform to the outside surface of a spinning ball in a vacuum. So, basically, I'm 48 years old. I've had businesses in the past. I've got 3 children, all successfully going to university, doing double degrees in chemical engineering, one veterinary science in learning. Um, I've had a pet store in the past. I've had cleaning contracts. I currently work in whatever sort of work I can find, which happens to be traffic control at the moment, but I don't think that what I do to pay my bills defines me as a person or who I am. I've always been a philosopher, a surfer, a nature lover. Love the outdoors, love photography, and basically, I think I've got a pretty good bead on the way things work. So when I hear people sort of laugh and think that I'm a fool or an idiot or a moron and all the rest of the things they love to say, just because I've come to the understanding that I think we actually live on a planar Earth, and it's possibly the only physical plane in existence, that everything else is lights. There's nothing to prove that they're terra firma. And we live in quite a unique and special place. I don't think that makes me a moron at all. I think it actually makes me rather ahead of the pack. And it's going to be great to see the rest of the world finally catching up. And eventually, I think we're going to look back at an era where people who believed we lived on the outside surface of a spinning ball are actually pretty much clinically insane. So that's my position.
Okay. So I think I can hear myself. Can you maybe tune down your audio a little bit, if that's possible?
I've actually got the YouTube one on pause. I'll have a look at the Hangouts.
Are you using earplug?
No.
Okay, it would be better if you would be using some of those, but if it's not possible, then just if you have the opportunity, just tune down your audio a little bit, because I think the voice coming out of your speakers is being caught up by your microphone, so I'm getting feedback.
Oh, okay. Is that working any better, or hasn't silenced me too much?
Test. Okay, seems to be better. Not perfect, but okay. Okay. So yeah, audio issues are normal. Don't worry. So what do you think is the best argument, in your opinion, to show that the Earth is flat? Like, if you had one argument on which you would have to bet your reputation, what would that be?
I could probably think of 3 off the top of my head, but my absolute best one is just the nature of water. The nature of water says that it does seek and find its level. It, by definition, is level. That's what we use to determine level. That's why we use a spirit level, is water. And it has to be contained by higher edges. So therefore, it's a form of insanity to me to believe that water will actually go around and over a curve and hit land that is somehow both above water level but still below it. It becomes a big contradiction. It has to be higher than the ocean's level. All of the earth that we know and live upon is that which is demonstrably and measurably above sea level. So although you've got the hypothesis of everything being drawn towards the center of the spinning ball, that's all it is. It's a hypothesis. But in actual reality, what we can and do observe and see is that the land is above that water level.
Okay. Do you understand the difference between flat and level?
what is the difference? You explain that to me, because I don't believe there is a difference. I can understand something can be flat without being level, but I don't think that something can be level without being flat.
Well, in this case, level just means that the surface of the water is perpendicular in regards to the force that is acting upon it.
Hypothetically speaking, yes, but in reality, how can you prove that? It's just a thought, which basically, when it comes down to observable reality, is an insane belief.
So you don't think there's a force acting upon water all the time?
No, not at all. Not apart from just the natural density and buoyancy of a liquid, of a fluid, which happens to be H2O, and that's what it seeks to be at. And that's
Okay.
the only force.
So obviously you don't think that gravity is a thing.
I believe it's completely unnecessary. It's just a made-up theory to try and describe how the absurd theory of living on the outside surface of a spinning ball could be possible. But in reality, that's not needed. Everything finds its place according to density and buoyancy, without the need to invent a theory of having an invisible force causing it to happen that way.
Can you do me a favor? Because it's possible we might be talking past each other here. Can you define for me, please, what you mean by density and buoyancy?
Well, density is basically the relative density of a particular mass. And when you compare it to, say, another thing, say you got your liquids, gas, solids, something, the more dense something is, the more solid it appears. The less dense it is, the more gaseous it may appear, and liquids are somewhere in the middle. So I think we all understand what density is. Buoyancy, therefore, is the resistant force of a particular density of a medium, which gives resistance to something, which means it either is at rest or it is falling through it until it comes to rest, where it will remain at rest. So it's pretty straightforward, really. Very basic stuff.
So you seem to be accepting that buoyancy is a force, right? And density is not.
Buoyancy is a resistant force, yes. Yep.
What do you mean by resistant?
Is the only force. Sorry?
What do you mean by resistant in this case?
Well, it resists something due to its density. So the more dense it is, the more resistant it becomes. So that's how things, say, in a density tower reach their level, because the more dense thing sinks to the bottom because it's not being resisted by the thing above it, until eventually everything finds its particular level due to the amount of resistant force beneath it.
Okay. Do you understand how a centrifuge works?
You might have to run that one through me. What, something spinning?
Yeah, basically what you do is, let's just say you have two different media with slightly different densities and you want to sort them. One easy way is to put the vessel in which they're in into a centrifuge and spin it very fast, because the centrifugal force that you apply on them is so high that those phases, for example, will actually be separated quite easily. This is a rather simple experiment you can do to actually show that in order to separate something by density, you actually need a force that is not the density itself. For example, if you have a horizontal centrifuge, can you agree that two different liquids with two different densities, for example, water and gasoline, don't separate in a horizontal manner? They only separate vertically with a less dense gasoline floating on top of the water?
Yeah, I guess that sort of depends a bit on perspective there, doesn't it? Because what you think is horizontal and what you call vertical is really just a matter of how you're looking at it. But really, it is horizontal. One is sitting on top of the other, which is by definition what we would consider a horizontal.
Yeah, I mean, in case of, for example, just you have a bucket and it's filled with water and gasoline. Obviously, the two phases are going to separate, right?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you do the same thing, when you have a vessel with water and gasoline inside a centrifuge, you can make them separate in a different way, namely horizontally, which is something you cannot do otherwise.
Fair enough. Yeah, but I don't see what's the real great point about that and what it's got to do with the shape of the Earth. But anyway, I'll see where you're going with this.
It's quite simple, actually. So what's happening in the centrifuge is that you apply a centrifugal force. Basically, as you spin it up, the inertia of the object wants to keep it flying out in a straight line. but the centrifuge itself is accelerating inwards, and the result is that the liquid in question feels an acceleration outwards from its
because it's in an enclosed container, right, with a bottom to it, and it's all getting pushed outwards towards the bottom. Yeah.
Yes. So what this shows is actually that the density itself cannot lead to a separation of the two liquids in any particular direction unless there's an external force acting upon the two.
No, that's just creating a whole different force rather than allowing them to settle naturally as to what they would do otherwise. Yeah, when we're talking about the natural force, when you're not applying any other force, they'll do what they're going to do. When you start spinning them, they'll do something completely different. Yeah, that is pretty much how I got into the whole concept of potential, questioning the shape of the Earth in the very first place. Is when you consider the fact that when you boil Billy tea, as we do here in Australia, when you go camping, you get like a tin bucket with a wire handle. You boil your water in it, you throw your tea leaves in, and when it's boiled, you tap the Billy a few times with a stick to knock off the ashes, because if you don't, they'll go flying off and you create a potential bushfire. But then you spin it around. So you know how when you do that with a bucket of water, you can have the water completely upside down for a momentary point as you keep spinning it, because the centripetal force is pushing everything outwards. That was what made me think if we were living on the inside surface of a spinning ball, that would explain gravity. Everything's getting pushed outwards by a centripetal force. While rain flows outwards, everything goes towards the inner surface. But of course, it's fraught with other problems, which of course all come to light. Like we could be on the inside of a big spinning tube, I guess. That would sort of work, but it just isn't the way it is. We live upon a stationary planar Earth, and so therefore all these other forces which you can apply to something aren't really applicable to describe reality of nature as we can see and observe it.
Well, regarding your idea that I can still hear myself. It's really annoying. Can you please try to get some earplugs if that's possible?
Okay. I don't know what you're hearing, but
well, I can hear myself every now and then with like, I don't know, half a second delay or something, which is just really annoying because it's confusing and you can't speak that way. Because you're hearing yourself with a delay. Whatever. Just leave it. Okay. So regarding, obviously you accept that centripetal and centrifugal forces are a thing, right?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So on our spherical Earth model, do you know how to calculate or in general, do you know how to calculate centrifugal forces?
I don't see how being on the outside of a spinning sphere has anything to do with how you would calculate something that you are artificially spinning one way or the next. It wouldn't make any difference as to the shape of the ground you're on as to how you'd calculate it.
Well, for example,
I guess you just calculate it in RPM, wouldn't you?
No, because
obviously
the result needs to be in newtons. For example, if you have 1 kilogram of water on the surface of the planet, what force would it feel outwards due to the spin of the planet? And what you need to do in actuality to show that the water, for example, wouldn't stick to the spinning ball would be to show that the centrifugal force that the water would feel would be bigger than the gravitational acceleration it would feel. Because basically, as soon as those two are in equilibrium, the water wouldn't stick anymore. And as soon as the centrifugal force is higher, the water would fly off. And you can actually do that quite easily by plugging the numbers in.
But obviously we know that it doesn't, so I don't think it's really something that we have to really concern ourselves with. You know, we know for a fact that even in your spinning spaceball model, it's not spinning fast enough to send all the water flying off, even though you do say the surface speed is going about 1.35 times the speed of sound. You know, you call it a very slow in terms of RPMs, but by the time you add in the factor of the radius of the so-called Earth, so it makes it about 4,000 miles long, by spinning at the speed of a half the speed of the hour hand of a clock, that surface speed becomes 1,000 and 38 miles per hour, which is about 1.35 times the speed of sound, which is ridiculously fast.
Yeah,
So,
I agree, it is fast. However, the amount of acceleration obviously is not only dependent on the surface speed, it's only dependent on the it's also dependent on the radius. And as said, if you actually do the calculation, you will see that the gravitational acceleration is about 300 times higher than the centrifugal force of the spin of the planet. So physically, or mathematically at least, everything is all right with a spherical Earth model. Do you accept
well,
that?
actually, it has to be, because otherwise you wouldn't have come up with the false belief of it in the first place. So,
Okay, so you think that all our maths that we have, all our physics that we have works?
physics definitely works, but that physics is based on the fact that they claim that the Earth is stationary and not moving. That's how all physics equations are based upon in the first place. They don't base it upon being on the outside surface of a spinning ball hurtling through space at some 86 times the speed of sound. It's just not required, not necessary, and in fact makes everything impossible if that was the case. Like a flying vehicle would never work if the Earth itself was hurtling 86 times the speed of sound, as it's also spinning at 1.35 times the speed of sound.
Why do you think
It's
it
a
wouldn't work?
nonsensical, absurd belief.
Why do you think a flying vehicle wouldn't work?
Because it couldn't keep up. Once it leaves the surface is taking off at ridiculously fast speeds.
No, you seem to be misunderstanding that. For example, when I'm sitting here on my chair, right? I'm, for example, moving at the same speed as the ground below me.
So you say, which is feels to you as though you're not moving at all.
Yeah, okay,
Probably
then
you're
let's
not moving at all.
say I'm in a train, for example, a train that's moving at a constant 300 kilometers per hour, for example.
Okay.
Okay, what happens if this train is not accelerating? So it's moving at a constant speed, and I just jump. Do I fly back towards the end of a train at the speed of
Depends on
300?
how high you actually jumped. I mean, generally speaking, you don't push off high enough to have a significant amount of difference to notice. And
Yeah,
at the
let's just
same
say
time, you've also
I have
enclosed within a sealed capsule. You've got walls all around you. You've got the front and back of the train pushing all that atmosphere with you the whole time. But
yeah, but it's
got
kind of
nothing to
similar
do
with
with
the Earth, isn't it?
what it's like to be on the outside surface. Now, you get up on the roof of that train at 300 kilometers an hour and you jump up, I can guarantee you will go flying backwards.
Yes, that's because the atmosphere is already moving at a high speed relative to you. However, that's not what we think is happening on the Earth, because basically the friction between the atmosphere and the Earth keeps the atmosphere at the same rotational speed as the rest of the planet.
What friction?
Otherwise,
there is no enclosure around the Earth in the globe model. You need a full-on enclosure, like a windscreen and sides of the vehicle, to be enclosed to have the friction to drag that air with you. You're saying all these mountains are pushing the air around at that speed?
no, basically it's the entire surface. It's not only the mountains. It's pretty much every point of the surface. There's a shearing force between the surface of the planet and the atmosphere.
So it just grabs the atmosphere and pulls it with it?
Over time, yeah.
And so how do you explain various directional winds?
That's because when the sun irradiates the atmosphere, what's happening is as the as the air gets heated up, its pressure changes, its density changes, and when you have a density gradient, in this case, it will try to equalize, which is why air masses will flow from high pressure zones to low pressure zones, and that's what wind is.
While being magically velcroed to the surface of the Earth somehow for reasons. That just doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense at all that you can have both winds and the atmosphere is moving with the Earth.
Velcro is probably the wrong word here. It's not like glued to it. It still obviously has the ability to move, but over time, because the Earth is rotating underneath it, you will have the atmosphere on average moving the same.
And so how do you explain that on a perfectly still day when there's no wind whatsoever, the whole atmosphere feels to be perfectly still? Are you also suggesting then that air is moving with you at approximately 1,000 miles an hour, and as it gets higher and higher, it is increasing at just the right amount to still remain appearing perfectly still? I mean, that's a pretty good trick, like to even pull that one out, to even think that that's possible, to me, that is incredibly insane, and it's the thinking of somebody who hasn't thought things through properly all the way through, to think that that is the case. While somewhere else you've got winds going 400, or maybe not 400, but 200 miles an hour. Somewhere else is having a hurricane circling around a central point. But all this stuff is still moving as one, even though some of it's perfectly still, some is going flat out. Some places have got winds going multiple different directions, but somehow, because you've got this belief that we're on a spinning ball, it can still somehow do this. There's no logic behind that whatsoever.
May I just ask you, have you ever worked with fast rotating machinery?
With fast what machinery?
Rotating machinery. For example, like drive shafts or anything like that. Ever seen anything that's rotating at a few thousand RPM in midair?
Well, yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay,
so all sorts of things rotating.
Okay, so when you get close to a fast rotating shaft, do you feel the wind that it's producing because of the friction between it and the surrounding air?
You possibly will feel some air getting displaced by it. Yeah.
Well, not displaced. I mean, we're talking about the rotating shaft. It's not displacing anything. It's just there's just a friction force between it and the surrounding medium.
Well, generally speaking, no, it doesn't grab hold of the wind and move of the air and move it all around with it. No.
It does or it doesn't?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't. So you don't.
You might feel a little bit of breeze coming off it.
Yeah, and why is that? Why do you think you can feel the breeze coming off from it?
Because as it's moving, it's displacing some amount of the air and pushing it away from it.
Well, not displacing.
The whole Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. It should be pushing the air away from it, not dragging it and pulling it with it.
Why should it be pushing the air away from it? Because it's not like it's changing volume or anything. That's not happening.
It's the same as your rotating machine you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. That's the point.
On its axis.
Yeah, that's the point. But it's not changing its volume, so it's not pushing anything away. Why would it push anything away if it's a smooth surface?
A really bad example to try and bring up to try and explain why you think it does it on your spinning ball.
No, actually, it's a good example for the reason that if you actually scale down the Earth to, let's say, I don't know, 50 centimeters in diameter, it would be smoother than most machinery you would be working with. Like the scale of the highest mountains in comparison to the size of the planet is very small. So the Earth is actually very, very smooth.
See, this is the sort of excuses you guys keep making up because you don't want to deal in reality. In the reality of real scale, we've got mountains which are thousands of feet high. We've got cliffs. We've got oceans, tempestuous oceans. We've got all sorts of things which are really, really big. And you want to try and scale it down to your little toy models all the time. And that is why you get so lost, because every time you scale something down to your little toy models, you're losing grasp of reality. And then you're starting to try and understand things in terms that don't comport with reality.
I actually don't agree. Scaling things down is perfectly fine as long as you know what the scaling actually does. Because scaling effects don't necessarily have to be linear. And as long as you understand that, as long as you understand the effect of actually doing this, it's perfectly fine to make models that are downscaled.
To some degree, yeah, but not when you're really trying to understand reality, which is why the flat Earth itself cannot really be modeled the way that you guys would like to think you could, because light itself is a reactionary part of their atmosphere. The atmosphere exists because of the size and nature of it is, and everything to do with convergence and perspective all has to do with real and actual scale. So when you try and scale that down, unless you scale yourself right down to this tiny microscopic size as well to live on that tiny little model, you are never ever going to try and understand the reality of the world upon which you live. So trying to understand it in terms of models is, again, it's another form of insanity, and that's why the flat Earth cannot be modeled the way that you guys like to see things and working on your tiny little models.
Okay, so when you have no model to actually use, and that's something you appear to be saying that it's actually impossible to model it. Can you offer any mechanism to use a flat Earth to actually predict future events?
Well, yeah, the way everything exists in reality, the way we observe it in reality, you actually have to step outside and look around you and try and understand everything. It is actually a really, really big world, despite, the way we like to scale everything down and look at it on maps and look at it in our models, look at it in our computers. It is still a really massive place. And until you can grasp the scale of reality as it is, then you're always going to have troubles trying to grasp the way the flat Earth really works. You have to grasp it at full scale. There's no other way around it.
I mean, for example, solar eclipses. You understand that we can predict the time and date and location of solar eclipses to a few milliseconds at this point using the globe model, and it actually works.
I understand that, but they're also doing it with the geostationary flat model astrolabe for thousands of years before people decided to come along and think that it also can be done modeled with a globe. I think trying to model it with the globe has got nothing to do with how it actually works anyway.
You need to be careful here, because they did predict solar eclipses, but not to the degree of accuracy that you can do with using the globe model.
Well, that's fair enough. Can you tell me then how
pretty much on which day a solar eclipse would occur? But they, first of all, they wouldn't know how much of the sun would be covered, whether it would be covered 100% to get a total solar eclipse or just a partial one. And they also wouldn't know where exactly on the planet it would happen. The derivations they got were gigantic. However, when you use the globe model, you can pretty much predict it in an accuracy on, I guess, less of a kilometer on the surface of the planet and less of a second when it comes to timing. So the accuracy you get out of this is actually
basically what's happened over the same period of time is we've been able to predict all sorts of other things far more accurately over those last couple of thousand years.
Yeah, but we do that using mathematics
on the outside surface of a spinning ball.
Yeah, but we do predict this using mathematics or using the data that we get from the globe model.
So you say, but you know, I can't see any evidence to support that. To be honest, you know.
I think one of the first,
effectively and just as accurately over the flat model.
I think one of the first examples of somebody predicting an eclipse to the accuracy or close to the accuracy that we have today. And side chat, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it was Sir Edmund Halley who also discovered Halley's Comet, who actually did the calculations to predict the time, date, location, and the degree of cover of a solar eclipse in southern England about 200 years ago or something, but whenever the guy lived. And he actually, he predicted it to an accuracy of 5 kilometers or something, and it worked, which is somehow amazing. And all he used was the data from the globe model.
Yeah, but I think, again, you're just you're putting the globe model up on some sort of pedestal where it's not really necessary if you understand the mechanics of how it works, regardless of which model you're following.
Yeah, what do you think mechanics are?
The same way. And once you get better and better at predicting these things, of course, you're going to get more and more accurate. But it doesn't mean, for example, that the model that you are working with is still the right model. It just means that you've made assumptions, you've worked around them, but you still haven't proven the actual things required to prove your model in the first place.
Which may I just ask you,
with predicting celestial events.
Okay, let's just say that we had no proof for the Earth being spherical whatsoever. What would you accept as proof for it?
Well, then I would turn around and say whoever's trying to make this claim that we're spinning faster than the speed of sound, that we're hurtling through space 86 times the speed of sound, and that the sun is hurtling through space 514,000 miles per hour, I would say, well, you need to bring some proof to the table if you're going to be making such outrageous claims. You need proof. You need evidence. All you've got is mathematical equations that have no measurability in reality.
Yeah, I mean, for example, if I went out in the field and I would be setting out to prove that the Earth is a sphere, would you accept for me, for example, let's see, taking a look at faraway objects and see how much of them is covered by the horizon, and then determining on that how
I personally have come to a clear and proper understanding of how perspective works and how convergence works. When you're looking out at a distance, you can see it in your own room that you're sitting in right now. You can see the floor in front of you appears to rise up in front of you. You can see the ceiling appears to sink down above you. That is called convergence. You know they're both parallel to one another, but as they get further and further away, they appear to get closer together. So when you're outside, you've got the phenomenon where there is no ceiling. So the air, of course, you can see through, but the ground beneath you, you can't see through. So when it rises up to the center point, the convergence point, that's where you get your obscurity point, and that's where taller objects can be seen if they're above that point, where the bottoms can be obscured in the distance. It's just a false interpretation of the way people viewed the world. They saw boats disappearing in the distance, we could see the tops. And so they came to the conclusion that it was curvature, but it's a false conclusion. They just didn't understand the way convergence and perspective works to create that illusion.
I think you're mistaken there for the reason that if you have parallel lines over prolonged distances, they won't intersect at any distance. Meaning
Well,
that
no, that's a false assumption. The higher the parallel line is, the more steeper it will appear to sink down as it gets further away.
It will appear, but it's not actually sinking down. It will appear to be sinking down, I agree, because that's how perspective actually works, but it will not cross over. And it's still parallel to the bottom line if you have two parallel lines that are aligned to one another vertically.
Well, that's why you're misinterpreting how reality works, because eventually there's a distant point where it does get far enough away that's what creates the obscurity point, and that's called the horizon. And it's always going to be at high level.
You show that.
What's that?
You actually have to show this, because as far away as you can look, as far away you can resolve something which is provably parallel, you will be able to see that they're not crossing over. You will either run into resolution issues of whatever device you're using from your vantage point, whether it's your eyes or a camera or whatever, or you will see that. Yeah, but basically that's the only thing that can happen.
No, again, you're making
when you have something that's provably parallel over a longer distance, you will never see them cross over.
You can clearly see in multiple cases where a distant ship or a distant city, some parts of it are obscured because the things that appear to rise up create the obscurity point. It's just the fact of perspective that you cannot escape. The fact is that most of the time, people have been living their lives in their very small little bubble of world that they view in, and they think of the horizon as being some sort of edge or curvature or whatever they want to believe it to be. And so they don't think of things further beyond that you can see the tops of, like the top of a mountain, for example, in the distance. The bottom is obscured because the bottom is obscured by everything else that appears to rise up in front of it. But if you use your logic and common sense, you know it's just the appearance of something rising up in front of you. It's not actually rising up. It's called convergence. Everything goes towards the center.
Well, but you do understand that. Let's just assume you have an infinitely wide flat plane, right?
Yep.
That as long as you're over that flat plane, and there are no objects in the way to the object that you're looking at, theoretically you can look infinitely far away. Do you agree that that's the case?
No. I just explained.
Okay, may I just ask how
point is generally from a 6 foot height. It's all to do with viewing height. So from a 6 foot height, that obscurity point is at about 3 miles. That's it. That's what you see across flat level water.
Okay, but you understand that this mathematics is. You understand that this distance, this basically the horizon distance, being, for example, for 1.8 meter tall person is 3 miles, which is approximately correct if I remember it correctly. That pretty much directly fits, or that perfectly fits to the expectation that we have from a spherical Earth, right?
I know, isn't that amazing how you back engineered the globe?
No, it's not. It's not
actual reality of what we see across the plane.
It's not back engineering, because this is not the only data point. Basically, what we do is we have multiple types of observations that all point to the same conclusion. We have the distance to the horizon. We can see that objects further behind the horizon are blocked by the horizon in a certain way, and this certain way is directly dependent on your height and on their distance. And this directly shows, from that information alone, you can derive the circumference or the radius, because you can obviously derive both, because one is dependent on the other of the planet.
How come then, no matter how high you go, this curvature can never be seen? It always disappears to a point in the distance.
You can directly see it from altitude of cruising airplanes.
No, you cannot.
Yeah, you can see that the horizon is dipping 3 degrees below eye level at 10 kilometers altitude.
No, you can't. That's using something like a theodolite or something to give you what your actual height would be at that distance. It's not giving you what actual eye level really is. And
Well,
all
the theodolite does is check where exactly down is, and from that you can derive all the elevation angles, and you will see that from the direction down below being, let's just define that at 0 degrees at the ground, you see the horizon a little bit less than 90 degrees, and as soon as you're over 10 kilometers height or at 10 kilometers altitude, you will see that the horizon is only at 87 or 86.7 or something degrees. And this is also directly dependent on your altitude, and it fits with the globe model. So yeah, that's another data point you can use to show that the Earth is a sphere.
It fits with your urge to believe the globe model, but it doesn't fit with reality. In reality, the horizon is always eye level, 100%. It's the only thing that creates the horizon, is your eyes and your limited view, and it just gets blurrier and blurrier the higher you get. It does not sink down, as you claim. All those theodolites and so on are doing are showing you what your level would be at that distance if something was at the same height that far away. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah, but you're simply wrong on this point. From tall mountains alone, you can see that the horizon dips below eye level. It's not at a horizontal angle anymore. It's slightly below it.
Well,
And
from a mountain, you might
this actually
expect
happens
that to be the case
faster
because
the
you are
closer you are
actually
to the
much
planet.
higher.
What?
From a mountain, you might expect that because you are actually much higher. But
not higher than an airplane. Airplanes cruise at around 10 kilometers altitude. The highest mountain we have on the Earth is Mount Everest at 8,848 meters. Most mountains that you can actually climb without, using oxygen masks and that kind of thing and not getting all dizzy because your brain is dying. The border for that to be starting happening is at, I don't know, 4 kilometers or something, so half of that. And even 4 kilometers is high enough to actually use the device to show this easily.
Use a device, exactly. But your eyes, on the other hand, will always create the horizon at your midpoint. That's just how convergence works.
Actually,
Everything
no,
converges towards the center.
That's probably because when you're walking up that mountain, you probably lose any reference frame regarding on where horizontal actually is, and this 1.7 degrees or so, 2 degrees or so, whatever you expect for 4 kilometers, you will not notice this.
No, it's because you can actually see
that's just
further.
what your brain does. It aligns itself with the horizon. That's why you need a device to independently verify that.
See further, and therefore it still keeps rising to eye level. That's actually what's going on.
Yeah, but
You can't
again,
make it out
any
so
type
well,
of
as I say,
technology
it
we
does
can,
vary.
any type of technology we can use, the other lights, for example, or just take two connected water glasses that are connected, with a water hose.
Yeah, a crude theodolite, yeah.
Yeah,
but the water level
water theodolite, yes. If you
hundreds
use
of feet
this, you will
below you.
also see, and if you align your eyesight along those two devices or those two buckets, you will see that the horizon is slightly dipped below it. You will see that
sure
at every case in a high mountain range, you will get this.
That's right, because you are artificially creating water level at a height it doesn't normally exist at. If you left water level at water level, which is sea level, and then you looked at the sea from that height, it will still appear to rise to eye level. You are just using that theodolite to mess with actual water level and to mess with your head to thinking that you're somehow changing the horizon level. That's all you're really doing.
Yeah, well,
you're showing what your height would be at that distance where your obscurity point exists.
When you are at sea level, obviously you will expect the horizon to be at 90 degrees from below you. But
if you're using water to measure your level, yes, of course. But why would you use
not only water, whatever theodolite device you're using doesn't make a difference. But do you understand that we expect the angle of the horizon to dip below eye level on a sphere, right? You do understand?
I know you expect that, and you'll use all sorts of trickery to convince yourself that's what's happening.
No, they're not trickery. They fit perfectly. It's a perfect match.
No, trickery is by bringing up water level and containing it in something artificial, which that's
Well, it
not
doesn't.
true
That's the
water
point. It
level at
doesn't
all.
necessarily need to be water. You can use whatever theodolite you have. It can, for example, just be a weight on a string. That's your reference frame. It works the same way.
A weight on a string.
Yeah. Let's just say you have like a tripod. So, okay, so you walk up that mountain, right? 4 kilometers, let's say. What you take with you is a small metal string, like a metal cable or something, a biggest weight. I don't know. Let's just say a rocket will do. And that's pretty much everything you need. You just let that rock dangle below the theodolite on the string. What the string will show you, that's the direct way down is.
Hanging a plumb bob basically in front of a theodolite. You're still going back to the theodolite.
Yeah, but you said it would be dependent on water, and I'm not using water.
Well, a theodolite does the same trick as what the water was doing. That's all. The water's just a cheaper way of doing it than getting an expensive theodolite.
Yeah, okay, so you're saying
Now
that it doesn't matter what type
but
of
then you're still bringing the
medium you're
theodolite
using,
again.
because you were pretty specific earlier about using water. I just want that cleared up.
Yeah, well, okay. I've also said that it is a crude theodolite. That's the same thing, mate.
Okay, so
you've turned around and said all you need is a piece of metal string and a weight, and a theodolite. So
okay, so you understand that we can use the theodolite to actually determine where the horizon is, right?
No, you're determining your height at what you would be at if you're at the distance away where you see the horizon. The horizon is created by eye level, but the theodolite shows you what your elevation would appear to be if, say, you or somebody else was over at that distance at the same height you are. It's showing you your level. It's not talking about eye level. Well, it's two completely different things, and that's why everybody keeps confusing it, because they keep saying, see, it's below eye level, but that's not what eye level is. Eye level depends on the viewer and what's inside your head, what you're seeing. And so, yeah, maybe you are looking down slightly. Maybe if you did tilt your head back, it would change. But if you kept your camera on a perfect level and you took a photo, the horizon would be the center of the field of view every time.
No, that's where you're wrong. You can do this experiment quite easily. That's why you use the theodolite. That's the method you use to actually determine or to make sure that your camera is, well, level. And you will see that the horizon is not in the center of the frame. It will be below the center of the frame at that point.
Look, if you wanted to build a large concrete floor and you want it to be level from one end to the next, yes, the theodolite's very handy for doing that.
No, you don't need
those limitations of the eyes that the eyes cannot account for, because when something gets in the distance and further, it appears to rise up. The theodolite takes over from that limitation of human eyesight.
Well, you just said that human eyesight is not necessary.
Other than eye level is just blatantly wrong and a complete misunderstanding of what the horizon actually is.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you just say that you can do the experiment with a camera and that you would expect the horizon to always be in the center of the frame, provided that the camera is level?
Yes. Yeah. If you sit in the camera on a level surface, which you can do with you'd use a spirit level to keep it flat and level. You hold it straight, and the horizon will be the center of the field of view. The actual height, if you use the theodolite, will show a level like an inch or so higher than that, or whatever it is, depending on how high you actually were, because that's showing.
Obviously, we're talking in degrees here, so I can assure you 100%. Do you have any high mountains in Australia? I'm not familiar with the geography.
Oh, we've got a few, but where I live, we tend to have, it's mostly very hilly. We have what's called the Great Dividing Range, which is a mountain range that runs all the way down the just in from the east coast a bit. The nearest mountain to me is Wollumben, sometimes known as Mount Warning, and it is quite high.
Do you know how high approximately?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Yeah, I guess. Just estimated.
Google it for you.
Whatever, because I can do this experiment quite easily, right? The Alps are around, I don't know, 300 kilometers away from me. So the 3,000 meters or so are the tallest mountains in the German Alps. Yeah. When you go further south to Austria,
1,156 meters. This one is 1,156 meters.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's enough to actually determine it with
No, well, Cape Byron, the place
but yeah,
I often go
this
to,
experiment is quite
about
easy,
96
right?
meters.
Just take a camera, take a theodolite, mount the camera to the theodolite to make sure that it's level, or whatever device you're using for this. Drive to or climb to the top of a tall mountain and look at the horizon. Then check whether the horizon is at the center of the frame, provided that the camera is level. And I can already tell you, the higher you go, the more it won't be, for the reason that I explained to you.
So have you seen high altitude balloon footage?
Yes.
From people that have sent balloons up to like 130,000 feet?
Yes.
And showing how the horizon is still in the center of the field of frame and it is still perfectly level in 360 degrees.
First of all, you understand that the balloons are dangling, right? They're not, or the cameras are not level all the time, which is why
that's what's keeping the camera pretty much level, is because it is dangling and it's weighted in such a way, usually on a gimbal of some sort, that keeps it level.
Actually,
and
no.
That is why the horizon is always in the center.
Actually, no. The way the most weather balloons work, you have the balloon, then you have approximately 10 meters of string, and then you have the casing for the cameras. So yeah, a little bit of wind will make this entire thing swing back and forth. You cannot directly derive that the horizon is at eye level just from the camera footage alone. You need some reference.
Well, by the time they get to that height, there is no wind. There's way too thin. There's nothing pushing them around. The camera is sticking quite level, and as it swings around without bobbing up and down, without using the fisheye effect that most of them do, if it's using a normal camera lens, you will see it perfectly flat and level as far as the eye can see, and the horizon is still in the center of the frame. That's how it works.
First of all, do you understand that most cameras on high altitude balloons, they usually use action cams, right? Action cams and action cams have a rather wide field of view, around 120, 130 degrees. Something being in the middle of the frame doesn't really say anything, because the angular resolution of those cameras is very low. So if you were mounting on the position where you have the action cam, if you were mounting a zoom camera, let's just say a 300mm lens, which is a rather good zoom up lens, you would see that the horizon would be swinging all over the place. You cannot directly derive from this footage that the horizon is directly horizontal, because the angular resolution of the camera isn't good enough. You need a reference system.
Yeah, well, I don't know enough about what sort of camera equipment they've been using for most of these, but I've seen enough of it to show that when they're not using a fisheye lens camera, bobbing up and down, going concave, convex, level, concave, convex, level, so on and so forth, they're just using a normal lens camera. It shows it to be perfectly flat all the way around and approximately in the center of your field of view. Now, if you think that that compares to being at 40,000 feet, or compares to being at 8,000 feet, or compares to being at 4,000 feet, and still somehow you can't understand why it's in the center of your field of view because you don't understand convergence, then there's not really much I can do to help you on that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, again, I think I've already showed you the video of Rhetoric and Discourse a few weeks ago, where he actually did the experiment in an airplane, in a commercial plane, just using his smartphone. Did I show that to you?
Sorry, I missed that. What was that?
So I think the last time we were talking on Jared's channel, 82 Productions, I think I showed you back then a video of a guy called Rhetoric and Discourse, who was on a commercial airplane, and he used his smartphone as a makeshift theodolite, using a theodolite app to show where the horizon actually is. And yeah, he showed again that it's below eye level.
But this is the whole point that you keep missing, isn't it? You showed a line
attached to a camera, and he showed that when the camera is aligned horizontally, the horizon is not in the center of the frame; it's below it.
Exactly. That's the whole point, isn't it? That's not the horizon. The horizon is the line.
No, that's the complete opposite of what you just said. You said that the horizon would be in the direct center of the frame, and he showed that it isn't.
Yeah, because he's using a theodolite app, which is showing what his height would be at that distance, not the horizon height, which is at ground level. I can't explain it to you over and over. I think, if you want to find something else to prove curvature and show, like, for example, how a boat goes over the curve, starts going upside down around the ball, but never feels it, never accounts for it. I mean, the whole concept of that is so illogical. It's not even funny.
Are you
A boat
familiar?
going over the curve, but never actually goes over a curve.
But you do see the stuff getting over the curve. Hence, why stuff in the distance is blocked from the bottom up.
You're saying it's getting obscured, yeah, because of convergence.
No, because
everything to your
literally the
eye
Earth is in
appears
the
to
way.
rise up.
You
even
can
though it's
literally show that the Earth is in the way for the simple reason that the mathematics, the mathematics fits perfectly. Over a certain distance from a certain height over sea level, or over the ground for that matter, you can show that or you can predict on how much of an object is blocked from the bottom up, and you can use this only using the data that you get from the flat Earth model. From the globe Earth model. You know the radius, you know your the radius of the planet, you know your altitude, you know the distance to the object. You can just using those 3 data points, you can directly predict how much of that object will be blocked, which is a pretty good indication that the model we're using is correct.
Yeah, again, it's all back engineered on the strength of what we know convergence and obscurity points work at.
Okay, may I just ask you, do you think that all the direct footage we have, for example, from the International Space Station is fake?
I would say you've probably got some real footage from high altitude planes and so on.
No,
but
they're
everything
literally
to do
at the
with
height
the
where planes are
International
not.
Space Station is 100% fake, yeah.
Okay, because you understand that at this altitude, roughly 380 or 400 kilometers or something, planes cannot fly anymore because the air is so thin that the speed that you would need to have to actually hold yourself in the air would be lower than would be higher than the orbiting speed, and therefore anything that would just rely on atmospheric uplift would just fall to the ground.
Yeah, I'm well aware of that, of course. Yeah, and
Okay.
that's why the International Space Station can't possibly be existing where you claim it to be. It cannot possibly
you realize
be
we
the
can track
speeds
it, right?
that you claim it to be. You can never possibly send a space shuttle or a rocket to it as you claim it to be. It's all utter insanity and impossible. Do you know how fast
you do realize we
goes?
can track it, right? We know the orbital data of the space station, and we know where it will be at which position. And directly from that data, we can show that it's at the given altitude. Actually, I think Red's Rhetoric has measured it directly, only using 2 telescopes. He determined the space station's speed and its direction and its distance, therefore its altitude, and it all fits. Also, there's footage of amateur astronomers who actually took pictures of the ISS while a space shuttle is docking to it.
So you claim. Now that's an interesting claim.
Do you know
how
that is
fast?
fake?
Do you know how fast a speeding bullet goes? Off the top of your head.
That depends on the weapon you're using. Something between 2 and 10 times the speed of sound, I think.
On average, you could say that the average speed of a speeding bullet, high-powered rifle, 1,700 miles per hour.
Okay.
Can you see that with your naked eye?
A bullet?
Yeah, as it's going 1,700 miles per hour.
No.
No, you need high-speed photography to capture a speeding bullet. But you're claiming the ISS is going 10 times faster than that. It goes 17,500 miles per hour. It's going 10 times faster than a speeding bullet, and you claim an amateur photographer can just photograph it from Earth. Yeah. That's very interesting that you can claim that.
Why wouldn't they? First of all, they're much further away, which means that the angular speed from their vantage point is much lower than the bullet. No,
but it's still moving at that speed.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Just because it's further away, do you mean so if a speeding bullet is further away from you, you can see it more clearly?
No, in this case, obviously we're dealing with 2 different things. First of all, you actually have to check how big the object is in your field of view, meaning its angular size. That's one point. And the other point is how big is its angular speed, meaning that how many degrees of your field of view will it pass in a given time frame. And that value will be much smaller for the ISS, actually, than it is for a bullet.
Yeah, but that becomes rather convenient simply because you need it to be that way, even though you know it's going 10 times the speed of a speeding bullet, which cannot be seen with the naked eye.
Can you see ultrasonic planes? For example, the Concorde Were people able to photograph the Concorde?
Depends how fast they were going, I suppose.
No, I mean at full altitude, at whatever 18 kilometers or whatever they were flying at full speed, Mach 2 point something.
I know there are some photographs of it, absolutely, yeah, but that's also taken from another speeding plane.
Okay, what about normal planes? Do you know how fast they are?
Most of them travel at a roughly 500 mile per hour speed. That's the
Okay,
normal cruise
so that's
speed.
about 4/5, 80% or so of the speed of sound, right?
Approximately that, yeah.
Okay, can you see those?
Yeah, of course you can.
Okay, do you know how big the space station is?
It's about the size of a football field, I believe. So about
around
100 yards long.
60 times 100 meters if you include the solar panels. Because most of it, in terms of its area that you can see, is actually the solar panels for obvious reasons. Okay, now let's just compare the two. The airplane is approximately 10 kilometers away if it's flying directly overhead.
And it's roughly how long?
50 meters.
So about half the size of the ISS.
Yeah.
And it's flying, what, 4 or 5 miles away?
More like 6 or 7.
Yep, and it appears to be a tiny little speck.
Okay, how fast is it?
Well, it's alleged to be going 500 miles per hour.
Okay, let's just say it's more like 850 to 950 kilometers per hour. So that's a little bit less than 600 miles per hour, so 580 or something. Okay. So how far would this object move in your field of view per second, for example? We can actually do the calculation.
Yeah, look, I don't know, because distance diminution is a major player in something like that.
Okay, so
and you're talking about something that's only twice the size of this aeroplane now.
Yeah,
you're saying it's half the size of half the length of
I'm not claiming that we can resolve the ISS with our eyes to the same degree that we can resolve an airplane. As long as the thing is illuminated or self-illuminating in a way, its size doesn't really matter. As long as we can see it, as long as we know where it is, we can find out how fast it's moving. Right?
So you say, yep.
Okay, because theoretically, if you have a for example, have you ever seen footage of those rounds of those ammunition rounds that use phosphorus to actually mark their trajectory?
Yeah, yep.
You can see those, right?
Yep.
They are moving at 1,700 miles per hour, whatever your figure was. There's no speed in. There's no difference in speed between those and other bullets.
Well, I guess with their glowing lights, then they do appear visible. But whether there's a delay or not with the photography equipment capturing it, I couldn't tell you. But
well, the functionality of those usually is that the soldier who's firing it actually sees where the bullet is going. That means that, for example, if you have a high firing or a machine gun, for example, that's firing at a very high rate, every 50th or so bullet is one of those glowing ones to actually see whether you're hitting something close to the target or whether you're hitting the target itself. So if these things are actually bright enough for the soldier himself to actually see it while he's using it, which means that, yeah, you can see bullets going at that speed with your naked eye. And it also shows that as long as something is illuminating, as long as it's bright enough for you to physically see, its speed doesn't really matter. So yeah, we expect that we can see the ISS over that distance. We can see it moving.
Yeah, well, I still don't claim it. It's 450 odd miles high. For the very same reason you said a plane can't go more than about...
No. So the altitude of the ISS is around 400 kilometers. It's changing a little bit because of atmospheric drag, so it regularly needs to get boosted up to higher orbits, because otherwise it would fall down after some time, which is what's eventually going to happen to it. But yeah, 400 kilometers approximately.
Yeah, okay.
60,000 kilometers per hour.
And so...
No, 60,000, sorry, 30,000, I think.
So but you'd actually claim that something at that size, at that distance, is able to be detected.
Yeah,
And people
I mean,
do
as long
claim
as
to
it's
be able to
bright enough,
take it off.
as long as it's bright enough, it shouldn't be any problem.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, I still claim it's impossible for something to be at that height, to be moving at that height, for people to be traveling at that height, to be able to breathe at that height. I mean,
yeah, I mean, that's why they have a pressurized container. You understand this, right? You realize that you couldn't survive in an airplane if it didn't have a pressure chamber. 10 kilometers is enough for the air to be thin enough to kill you within a few minutes.
Exactly. So, I mean, what are they breathing up in this fake station? How much air do they ship up? Have they got like a scuba pipe back down to Earth?
I think what they have is they use. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, side chat, but I think they're using potassium superoxide canisters, which is basically a way to store oxygen in a solid form. And obviously, they're also recycling the carbon dioxide to the best degree that it's possible. But yeah, they regularly have to get new equipment up there to actually sustain themselves over there.
Yeah. It's all a bit of a long stretch, isn't it, really? It's a bit like the moon landing. What were they breathing on the moon? Oh, well, they had a little oxygen tank, and that allowed them to last up there for 10 hours or something at a time. But you have 2 large scuba tanks on the back of one diver, and they get to stay underwater for 1 hour. But I'm sure there'll be...
So I was just corrected. Apparently on the ISS, they get their oxygen from recycling water by electrolysis. But yeah, that works too.
So what happens to the water then? Don't they need water as well? If they're going to extract all the oxygen out of it.
Well, they're not venting it. You realize this, right? It's a closed system. Everything you breathe in, or any molecule that's up there will stay in there. They're not going to vent it into space.
Exactly, but where's the oxygen coming from? The oxygen gets used up. You breathe in 70% oxygen, you breathe out 14% oxygen.
I already told you, they're electrolyzing water.
Well, where's the water coming from?
Do you really want to know this? It's probably recycled. It's probably recycled from the sanitary systems.
You can only recycle the urine so many times before it gets more and more and more concentrated. And if you're taking the oxygen out of it, then you're losing the O compartment of the H2O, and all you then's got is hydrogen. You're left with a problem once again.
Well, the thing is, the hydrogen you can store that. That's not really an issue. You can store that and use it in a fuel cell later. The how was it called? The space shuttle, for example, had fuel cells on board that ran on hydrogen. So you can actually keep that as basically as a chemical storage system, chemical energy storage system. So in case you need more electricity for whatever reason, you can burn this hydrogen again in a fuel cell using the oxygen.
And yet here on Earth, we need trees and plants and algae and seaweed and everything to produce oxygen.
We don't theoretically we don't need it. It's just way more. It's just way better to use that stuff instead of using devices, because they just do it by themselves. Up there, we don't have any plants. I think we have a little bit for experimental purposes, but there's just not enough volume or area there to actually produce enough oxygen with plants in the ISS, which would be enough for the astronauts to survive on that alone. Which is why we're using devices.
The air and the urine and everything is going stale. It's all getting used up, and you're going to die of oxygen starvation within a matter of days, if not even less. There's just no way you can keep producing oxygen without the natural resources of plants that we have.
First of all, you realize that there are regular flights, cargo flights to the ISS, which bring new supplies, including food, water, and that kind of thing. And also, they're taking waste back down, right? Not only do they bring supplies up there, they also bring waste materials back down. Because otherwise, as you said correctly, you would pretty much, how can I say this the most politely way? Suffocate on your own shit.
That's exactly what they would be doing within days. That's why they call submarines, actually. I think the slang term for them when they come to shore, they call them pig boats, because the stench that comes from a submarine with all those living bodies on it and all that bacteria trapped inside of it with nowhere to go makes it smell.
How do you think it's in the ISS? There are always reports about astronauts coming back from the ISS and being glad that they are back because the smell in there is bad.
Yeah, but
obviously the sanitary conditions aren't ideal.
It happens so gradually that you don't really notice it so much. But yeah, you're exactly right. There is no sanitary conditions in a place like that.
Well, no, it's relative. I mean, they have vacuum toilets, so that's much better than what they had on Apollo. And please don't research this, because this is just, if you want to tape it back to your butt, then yeah, take an Apollo capsule. But yeah, the sanitary conditions in the ISS are actually much better than what they had before. Which is why technical innovations are still a thing, right? There's still new technologies invented, for example, to directly connect their spacesuits to the sanitary systems, because otherwise you will have to wear diapers, and that's pretty uncomfortable, even especially if you're working in non-G environment, because shit's going everywhere.
The amount of water alone you'd have to be shipping up just to keep the average person alive, let alone give them their oxygen, let alone to be able to wash and maybe, keep yourself a little bit clean. The bacteria build up. The whole concept of living basically in a tin can for months on end with bugger all but recycled urine going through some sort of great filtration system the maintenance of that alone would be more than a space shuttle every week.
Yeah, but I mean, you can do this on Earth. You do understand that, right? In nuclear submarines that are not dependent on fuel supplies, you can actually stay under the ocean for months at a time. And what's going to get you is not water or oxygen. What it's going to be is the food supplies. Because all the energy you get basically is coming from the reactors. As long as you have the base chemicals up there, you have no problems. You need food, and you need water and oxygen, and those you can recycle without no problem. And what you really need to get out,
oxygen, you use it up. You're just running out.
What do you think you breathe out?
You need fresh air, you need sunlight, and you need.
Do you understand? Okay, do you understand how cellular respiration actually works? Do you understand the molecules that get into it and the molecules that you get out of the reaction? Yeah, cellular respiration, which is the process by which animals or organisms that don't use photosynthesis, those as well, actually get their energy from.
Yeah, cellular respiration. You got me there, mate.
Okay, basically, in order to
breathe.
Basically, in order to keep an organism running, you need an energy source, and this energy source, in the case of animals, is sugar. Right?
Correct.
Okay, sugar can be polymerized to get flour and bread and that kind of thing. Those are pretty much completely 100% made of sugar, different sugar molecules. Now, in order to actually extract the energy out of them, you need to burn them. The way this is done is in the body, you use an oxidizer, which in this case, oxygen molecules from the air. And what you get out of the reaction will be carbon dioxide, which you exhale, and it will be water. So if you get water out of this, this can be easily electrolyzed again to produce more oxygen, which means that as long as you have an external electricity source, for example, those solar panels or that nuclear reactor in the submarine, as long as you have an energy source of those, you can pretty much keep somebody running forever, provided you have enough carbohydrates, for example, sugar and a little bit of other stuff that we need, food.
Yeah, as I'm just saying, your submarine can use desalination to take the salt out of the water and give you all the water you want. When you're up in space, water, you've got nothing. It's a closed system. As I said, they decommissioned the space shuttles years ago. What are they using to transport all this water up there to constantly keep them in supply of air and water and food and, all the rest? What are they sending up there? Can you even explain that? What have we seen? 1 or 2 Russian rockets over the last number of years that have actually claimed to have gone there?
No, so currently the only one that's able to shoot astronauts up there are the Russians. That's correct. For the reason that the space shuttle was decommissioned in 2011, I think. But you realize that the manned flights are not the only flights that are going to the ISS. A SpaceX,
Ah,
for example, is shooting up a Dragon capsule every few months, which brings up new fresh supplies, food, a little bit of water, and all the scientific experiments that they're doing up there. Those can be shot up using unmanned capsules, using other rockets.
yeah, well, yeah. I did spend a little bit of time this morning actually watching a few of these videos, totally debunking the way these guys are hanging off wires, the way they're carrying around like clowns. Like they've always got these great big laughing grins on their faces. They're always freshly clean shaven, nicely trimmed haircuts, all neatly pressed clothes and all the rest. I mean, are they using washing machines up there on the ISS, or what do they just hang the clothes out to dry on the on the solar panels or something?
I actually
There's so many different things that have to be taken into account when it comes to everyday living that is not taken into account. For these clowns, always looking, as I say, 100% like they've just walked out of, or maybe they are in a studio with makeup artists and people hanging them up on their harnesses, and you can watch them pulling on their strings and so forth. It really is hilariously fake if you really get down to it.
first of all, can we please not change topics all the time? Is that possible?
Well, we're still talking about the reality of being on the fake station, so I don't see how I was changing topics there.
Yeah,
sure.
because I'm dealing with the physical things here. You realize we have done similar experiments on Earth, right? Encapsulating people for a certain amount of time without actually having supplies coming from the outside. For example,
like
currently it's being done to simulate a Mars mission, which will be the next step regarding space exploration, a manned Mars mission.
Yeah,
So they're locked in.
Living the dream again. This whole idea of space exploration is complete matter.
I mean, what I'm saying, what I'm saying is,
people that are homeless a bloody decent place to live before we start talking about going to Mars and doing shit.
What I'm saying is, you can lock people in a closed environment, provided they have an energy source and enough food supplies. But water and oxygen can pretty much be recycled indefinitely. If it wasn't, then there would be no reason to do space exploration at all, because you would have to be carrying giant amounts of both materials with you, which is why actually just carrying the electrolyzer and a water cleaning system with you is much more efficient.
Until you run out of water.
Yeah, again, you don't run out of water because the astronauts exhale water.
Yeah, but you use it up as well. You just said that they're electrolyzing it to extract the oxygen which they are breathing. What part about that?
Again, it's a closed system. It's a closed system. Yeah, and that means you can recycle it indefinitely if you want.
14%. You need more oxygen. And if you're extracting it from the water, then you're using up the water. So you're running out of water. No matter how much you piss out or breathe out or whatever, you are running out. You
don't understand what a carbohydrate is.
Yeah,
do you understand what a carbohydrate is? Can you tell me the generalized formula for one?
Well, so now you're going to change the topic and
no. This is important. This is important because you don't seem to understand that the chemicals, the actual oxygen atoms that you need, you're actually carrying around as the food supply, because what a carbohydrate is basically it's how can I describe this the best?
How can you extract this from your ass the best? Yeah.
No. What's happening is your body will burn the sugar, and the sugar already contains both hydrogen and oxygen, which will in one way or another will end up in your environment. Either you breathe it out, you breathe the carbon dioxide out, but you also either piss or sweat out the water, which comes from this reaction. So the water that's, or the hydrogen and oxygen atoms that are actually bound within the carbohydrate, those will end up in the environment. They will end up in the capsule. And since you're getting water out of this, you can just recycle that again. So water is essentially not an issue. As long as you have enough food supplies.
Okay, then.
Those are actually quite easy to store because
nothing
they're
to do with
lightweight.
the shape of the Earth. I think we've established that really you're basically living in a fantasy world to believe that these people do live on this International Fake Station. You've brought up all kinds of reasons and excuses how you think they can recycle their piss over and over and over.
I mean,
and still
if we
extract
can do it here on
oxygen from
Earth,
them,
why
which
don't you
they
think we can
breathe
do
in
it
and
in
use up.
space?
But
You
all that
realize,
aside,
you
it still has
realize,
nothing to do with the shape of the Earth, does it?
you realize we can do those closed, or we can create closed systems like this here on the Earth, and those work as long as the people have food supplies and an energy source. And on the ISS, they have food supplies and they have an energy source, which are the solar panels.
But they don't have an air source. That's the thing. That's the thing.
You don't need an air source. That's the point.
You do need an air source.
No,
that's the most important thing.
No,
if you build
as
a
long as
biosphere and enough plants in there to produce oxygen for you, you will die. Simple as that.
long as those people are exhaling water vapor and are pissing out piss, they are fine, provided you can recycle it. And you can recycle it.
You're talking about some ridiculous kind of perpetual motion machine based on biology.
No, it's not a perpetual motion machine. A perpetual motion machine implies that there's no overall energy input. That you can create energy out of nothing.
The human body is burning up the energy. Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yes, and the energy in this case is coming from the it's coming from your food source, and it's coming from the oxygen. And the oxygen there in the ISS is created by electrolyzing water. And now that is the process which requires energy, and that energy comes from the ISS's energy source, electricity source, which are the solar panels. What energy source that is pretty much completely irrelevant. Yes, don't you understand this? The water they exhale is the water that the astronauts exhale is re-electrolyzed. Can you please let me make my point? The water that the astronauts exhale is reused. It's recycled, and then that water is either stored for consumption, or it is electrolyzed to get more oxygen for the people to breathe, which they breathe in, which they breathe in, used to burn more sugar basically, and get out more water, or the same. Well, the overall. Overall, it's a closed cycle. So the amount of molecules is not.
So the whole concept of entropy just goes out the window when you're on a fake station.
What?
Okay. The whole concept of entropy. You lose energy. You will lose mass.
Yeah,
you're using it up. You are burning it up.
No. You're not losing mass. You're not losing mass. What's happening? You realize they still shit stuff out, right? Which needs to be brought down to Earth and then, I don't know, disposed of in whatever way. There is still waste products there. You understand that?
Yeah.
Basically, that's where the entropy is going.
If you're saying that some of this water is being used in electrolysis to create oxygen, that means you're also getting hydrogen gas, which I don't know, what do they do with that? Do they burn it off?
No. But burning it makes no sense unless you're storing it for later use as an electricity source. But it's more likely that either they're just storing it for an indefinite amount of time, or they might also be venting it, because again, fresh hydrogen atoms would be coming from the food sources.
Right. So all the food is producing the oxygen. In other words, that's what you're trying to say. Food produces water and oxygen and waste and more oxygen. It just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. You cannot create more oxygen. Once you've burnt it up, it is gone. It is burnt up. You cannot.
Obviously, the overall amount of molecules of oxygen atoms is not going to change. That is correct. However, you can reuse every single molecule that's coming out of you indefinitely, provided that you have the technology up there to recycle it.
Yeah, and how long have they been up there for? And how long has this technology been around for? I mean,
recycling. Water electrolysis has been around for 100 years. Even more, I think, at this point, because all you need is direct current, and that's it. As long as
I've never heard of them making oxygen that way. I've never heard of them actually making oxygen that way.
You've never heard of a Hoffman device?
Hoffman device?
Yeah, it's a very simple device that directly creates oxygen gas out of water, and all you need to do this is a battery and 2 wires. And a glass of water.
So why haven't scuba divers been using these things for the last several decades.
Well,
or
because they need an
100
energy,
years.
they need an energy source, they need an electricity source, and if you are underwater,
Well, yeah,
you would have
batteries
to.
are pretty cheap.
You would. At this point, I guess it actually might work, but I think just carrying around the oxygen in a heavier tank is just easier and also safer, I guess.
Same as those CO2 scrubbers that they claim that they've been using for the moon landings as well, I imagine.
And the CO2
Yeah,
scrubbers, I think, use potassium hyperoxide. I'm not sure actually, but you realize those are two different things.
lithium
But yeah,
companies.
do you have a car
Lithium
battery
ion
at your?
scrubbers.
Can you do me a favor? Do you have a car battery at your home
Oh,
or
yeah,
something
yeah.
comparable?
Yep.
Okay, do me a favor and take your car battery. Do you have jumping wires?
Yep.
Okay, just take those jumping wires, connect one of the wires with each pole of your battery, and then dip both of the jumping wires in a water container, like something like a bucket or something. It's just important both in the same bucket, and they shouldn't be very close to each other to avoid that there's any direct current jumping over from one electrode to the other. And what you're gonna see is you will see a gas forming at both electrodes in the water. And interestingly, in a volume ratio of 2:1, on one electrode you will get 2 times the amount of gas you will get on the other electrode. Now, one of those electrodes.
Actually, I do something reasonably similar to that every time I make colloidal silver, but I use silver electrodes in the water, and generally just like a 9-volt charger sort of thing. And yeah, you're right.
That works as well. But
electrodes. Yeah.
Okay, but you see gas formation at both electrodes, right?
Yeah.
And do you see that one of those produces more gas than the other?
Yes, absolutely.
In approximately a 2:1 ratio. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, if not greater, but yeah, something like that.
Okay. Have you ever tried actually capturing the gases that are coming out of this?
No, I haven't. And I imagine you would have to be doing it at a hugely massive rate in order to create enough just to get one breath of it, let alone to keep half a dozen people alive all day, every day. Yeah, you're talking extreme amounts of gas that need to be produced to keep a human being alive. It's got nothing at all like the amount that you would produce from a tiny amount of water like that.
Okay. Shall we actually do the calculations? Because it's not that much, actually.
Yeah, it is actually quite a bit.
Okay, but yeah, again,
you said in a minute.
What I'm trying to say here is you observed this. You agree that in an experiment like this you can see the gas formation, right?
I would like to see, if you're talking about people using electrolysis to create oxygen, what sort of level you would need to be doing just to keep one person alive in, say, an underwater environment using electrolysis as your source of creating the only form of oxygen for just one person, half a dozen.
I'll have to ask Microblog for this because he's the biologist. Yeah. He actually knows how much oxygen
I'm sure you'll find that you totally debunk the very concept of it.
I guess it's not that much.
That's how they do it to create the oxygen they need to survive.
Micro, so to the side chat, Micro, can you tell me how much oxygen you need for a human to survive? How much do you actually breathe in and breathe out on average?
Well, off the top of my head, sorry, you're asking somebody else.
I don't know, maybe you're like breathing 4 times a minute, maybe 4 or 5 times a minute.
No,
and your lungs have the volume of, I don't know.
Far more times than that per minute.
Well, it depends on how much you're doing.
I always like to use, because my father was right into scuba diving. That's what he did for his exercise, because he couldn't run or walk or sort of thing, because with only one leg, the only form of exercise he could really get was swimming, and so he ended up taking up scuba diving. And as a result of that, he ran a scuba diving business as well, just to help pay for his hobby, so to speak. And he got a big air compressor, so he could fill up 2 big, large tanks, 2 big scuba tanks full, which last one person about 1 hour. 2 large tanks of compressed air. So I think when we're talking about how much a person actually breathes, if it wasn't compressed air, I would say you're talking in the vicinity of maybe 1 very large room full of air per hour.
First of all, I think you're comparing apples to oranges again, because when you're doing this underwater, you realize that the amount of air you have in your lungs, well, in general, you understand that the amount of air you have in your lungs is depending on the surrounding pressure, right?
Oh, I understand you're under a bit more pressure and you are going through it quicker. Yes, of course, fair enough. But that's still going to be a rough guide as to how much air you were breathing in an hour.
Okay,
even if you half that amount.
Microblog just found the value. So apparently, a human needs roughly 3.5 milliliters per minute per kilogram of body weight of oxygen.
Right.
3.5 milliliters per kilogram. Let's just say the average astronaut is a rather big guy of 100 kilograms, which would put this at 350 milliliters of oxygen per minute, which is not that much.
It's a lot.
No, it actually isn't.
Liters,
what you have to remember is if you electrolyze the stuff, you have an approximately 1 to 1,000 volume ratio between water and the air.
So you're talking a third of a liter of oxygen per minute per human. Multiply that by 60. That's how much you need per hour.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean
that's per day. Come on, you're talking massive amounts.
Yeah, but again, you recycle most of this, or all of this actually. You do understand that you don't have to electrolyze 350 milliliters of water per minute, right? You understand that it's more approximately a factor of 1,000 less.
No, I believe we're using up about 3% of the oxygen we breathe in every time. So you'd have to be producing at least 3% of that per minute.
We're talking past each other. You're talking past each other here. What I'm saying is that when you electrolyze water, the amount of volume of water that you lose in the electrolysis process is not identical to the amount of oxygen you get.
No, that's right. You'd actually use far greater amount of water to get that amount of oxygen.
No. It's the complete opposite. When we're talking about volume here, when you're talking about volume alone, the amount of how can I describe this? Let's just say that the amount of oxygen atoms in a milliliter of water is roughly 1,000 times more than the amount of oxygen atoms in the same volume of air, for the simple reason that in a gas the actual molecules are further away from each other. Now I'm not counting in the stoichiometry here, but it's an approximate figure that you can run by 1 to 1,000. It's more or less the density ratio between air and water. That means that you don't have to
convince yourself, mate, because you're not convincing me of anything.
What do you mean by convincing? This is just fact. You know how many.
Okay, so you just did a thing where you could work out how much oxygen a human needs per minute.
Yeah.
Can you tell me how much oxygen you can produce via electrolysis per minute?
Yeah, I can tell you. It only depends on the size of your device.
Yeah.
I can scale this to infinity if you want to.
Yeah, well, let's just talk about something that's realistic and fits on the ISS and works off the amount of sunlight they're getting off their solar panels, minus all their broadcasting and lighting and all the rest that they use for other things. You know.
Okay, yeah, I have to look that up. How big an electrolyzer of that power output and
I think you'll find that there's probably no information for it at all, because we know for a fact that the ISS is faked. It's all done in a model in an underwater swimming pool, and that the rest of it's done inside a studio. We've seen all of the way they fake it all. So I think it's safe to move on to something now where you can prove we actually live on the outside surface of a spinning ball. Like, what's your greatest proof that you believe that we are going these fantastic speeds? What proof do you have that we're on the outside surface of a spinning ball?
There are multiple. So, for example,
what's your best one? What's your greatest one that you would go to say, I can prove to you we live on the outside surface of a spinning ball?
I guess it's either the red and blue shift from distant stars that we see.
It's stars that we see. That's got nothing to do with the shape of the Earth.
Actually,
we live on the outside surface of a spinning ball.
Yeah, I already told you. That's one, or the other one, for example, would be a refined version of the Cavendish experiment, or maybe the Earth effect.
So scientific experiments in a laboratory prove the shape of the ground you live upon?
Yeah.
How?
For example, let's just take the which
Okay, I'll go
which
with the
shall we
Cavendish
start?
experiment since you brought that one up. Do you think the Cavendish experiment proves you live on the outside surface of a spinning ball? That sounds really interesting.
Sorry, did I say Cavendish experiment?
Mm.
Oh, sorry, I meant the Foucault pendulum.
Pendulums now.
Yeah, sorry. If I said Cavendish experiment, I was mistaken. I'm talking about the Foucault pendulum.
So the Foucault pendulum, you believe, is your best proof that we live on the outside surface of a spinning ball.
Yes.
And what is this pendulum attached to?
It's dangling from the top of a tower, for example.
And what is that tower attached to?
The Earth.
The Earth. And so this proves a spinning ball because of a dangling pendulum attached to the Earth.
Yeah, basically what's happening is that the plane in which the pendulum is swinging is usually constant because there's no external forces acting on it. That means that if the ground below the pendulum is rotating around it, you are able to see that pendulum rotating if you're standing on the ground around it.
But is not that ground around it attached to the sides of the building, which are attached to the top of the pendulum?
No, actually, the way that the pendulum is hung up there gives it the ability to swing in all directions, in all planes, which means that the plane of the swinging motion can actually rotate in every direction at once. And this is a direct. This directly shows that.
And does this pendulum need to be mechanized in any way, shape, or form?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I mean, yes or
no. No. The most simple ones don't have to. As long as the mass on the bottom is long enough to actually keep it swinging for longer times, it works perfectly fine. However, many of those demonstration devices have a little motor on top to actually keep the pendulum swinging indefinitely. But
and it gets
theoretically, it works without having one.
And it gets adjusted for the latitude too, right?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Oh, well.
That's one thing. You can actually derive your latitude. Let's just say you are in an enclosed room with no windows or anything. Theoretically, you can derive your latitude using only a Foucault pendulum.
And have you heard the fact that a Foucault pendulum actually reverses direction during an eclipse? Have you ever heard of that before? That's bullshit?
Yeah, I'm calling bullshit on that right now.
Okay, so you haven't heard about that. That's okay. That's fine. And again, if it's not mechanized and it's long enough, you think it basically works as a perpetual motion device too?
No. I'm saying here's the thing. The reason why you mechanize Foucault pendulums every now and then is because of the air resistance around it, and also the friction the friction in the wire itself, and the friction between the wire and the hang-up point on the top. That will slow it down over time. So you would have to restart it every now and then to actually keep it moving. Now, if you don't want that, for example, in a museum where it's just unpractical, you have a little bit of a motor on top, which just gives it a little swing every now and then, or all the time.
Therefore, it doesn't really prove the shape of a spinning ball whatsoever. It doesn't prove any motion of the Earth whatsoever because it has to be mechanized.
It does. Okay.
It has to be physically pushed.
No. It actually proves both of those.
Continuously.
It actually proves both of those because it's not about this. Remember, it's not about the amplitude of the swinging motion. It's about the direction of the swinging motion. It's about the ground turning underneath it, which means that on different latitudes, you will see different amounts of or different rates at which the plane of the swinging motion is rotating relative to the ground underneath it. On the North Pole and on the South Pole, for example, you will see that the plane of the rotation will be doing the plane of the swinging will be doing one complete rotation every day, every 24 hours. And that rate is going to decrease if you're going further south. If you're doing this experiment at 30 degrees latitude, I think, the
Yeah, I'm
amount
thinking
of time.
again, you're saying hypothetically though, aren't you? You're not really saying something that you've personally done, you've personally seen,
No,
that
you can't do that.
scientists have done. You don't know that a scientist has ever taken a Foucault pendulum to the North Pole and proven this. You don't know that they've taken it
You
to
can
the
do
equator.
this. You realize that there are multiple museums, right, which are using those devices every day, and those
Yeah.
museums are not on the same latitude, which means that every day data is gathered from those museums, which actually confirm that the expected rate of rotation of the swinging motion is identical to what you would expect on the surface of a sphere that's rotating at the speed we think it's rotating.
Okay, well, hypothetically then, what if the Earth were like a record with the North Pole being the middle part of the record, so that's the fixed point, everything spins around it. Would your Foucault's pendulum still work the same way if it was a flat disc like a record spinning that way and it gets faster and faster the further more outwards you get?
On the North Pole, we wouldn't be able, if we only had data from the North Pole, we wouldn't be able to see any difference. However, when you're going further south from the North Pole, for example, let's just walk south down America, right? Canada, USA, Mexico, Central America, and then the Andes. You would get different results. On the equator, for example, a Foucault pendulum on a sphere doesn't give out any rotation whatsoever. However, on the basically you're describing the AE model here. On the AE model, for example, you would still get those 24 hours at any latitude. You would also get them on the equator, and you would also get them south of the equator, where on a sphere we would actually expect the pendulum to rotate in the other direction. This is how we can actually determine that the AE model is bullshit. If the AE model, if you have a rotating AE model, for example.
Yeah, I'm just saying hypothetically, but I don't believe it's moving at all. I believe it's perfectly stationary, and I believe you have to set this pendulum in motion in the first place, and maybe it's not so much the latitude as the altitude of the different museums that might be affecting the rate at which it slows down or speeds up or whatever you claim it does. I personally just don't think there's enough evidence behind a Foucault's pendulum, especially if we look then at the history of what a pendulum actually is, which myself, having dabbled a fair bit into different things to do with esoteric and occult knowledge and so forth, a pendulum is basically a diviner's tool where they call upon some sort of spirit medium to give them a yes or no answer. If it rocks backwards and forwards, you'll say, tell me yes for backwards and forwards. If it goes around and around in a circle, then that means no, or vice versa. Whatever it is you ask and put into with your will into this pendulum, that is how a pendulum works. So, of course, when you're doing this on a grand scale by these masters, these wizards of science, which is really what science comes down to, it's all a bunch of wizardry, all sorts of sorcery and so on. I mean, Tesla said it better himself. I can't think of the quote off the top of my head. But that's all they're really doing, is they're performing some kind of spiritual seance type equation to get the answer that they want, that they are putting into the thing. They say, show us this, and that's what they get.
That's not how science works at all. Science will follow the evidence to whatever conclusion it leads. We will not bend scientific evidence to a preconceived idea.
I know it's nice to believe that. It might be a nice comforting thought for you, but that is the truth behind it all. It is all pseudoscience. It's all, it basically all comes down to being wizardry and formulas by these people in their bloody basements doing chemistry and all sorts of other alchemical sort of equations.
Yeah, first of all, when I'm doing chemistry, I'm not doing it in my basement. Usually, I'm doing it in the lab of the university.
Same sort of thing. That's what I mean, though. It's still in an enclosed room, isn't it, full of all your fancy equipment.
Oh, yeah, I'm using equipment because that's what I actually need to handle chemicals.
Exactly.
So, like in what way is that a problem? In what way is that a problem? Because some of the stuff that you have to work with is just dangerous.
So you don't want to. I'm just telling you what it is. That's all. Okay, let's not confuse the two. Let's talk about what you do in the laboratory and what you can do in the field, what you can do outdoors to actually prove you live on a spinning ball. And basically, you've relied on a diviner's tool, witchcraft, wizardry, to say that that's your best piece of evidence. So
what I said,
your
it was
best
one of
perhaps.
those.
Okay, that's one.
For example, the
I asked
Earth
for your
effect.
best.
Are you familiar with the Earth effect?
Sorry, the which effect?
Earthverse. This is. Let me just type it in the internal chat because it's hard to. There we go. Can you see it?
It's a bit delayed here for some reason.
Check the internal chat, the one in the Hangout window.
Oh, Earthos. Is that how you pronounce it?
It's from Earthverse, I think.
Yeah.
Basically, what it's saying is that when you are moving east to west on a rotating sphere, for example, let's just say you're standing on the equator, okay?
Sure.
So when you're standing on the equator, you and the ground underneath you will rotate at a certain speed, namely once every 24 hours, right?
Yeah, 1,038 miles per hour.
Yeah,
yes.
Okay, whatever. That means that if you're, for example, moving eastwards, the amount of or the speed of rotation for you is actually going to increase. Do you understand that?
I understand that in hypothetically, but in reality, I think it's a load of crap.
Yeah. Just let me explain this. So when you're standing on a rotating sphere on the equator and you're moving eastwards, basically you're rotating, eastwards. You're basically rotating faster than the sphere. Now Now this has some implications on the centrifugal force that you feel, right? Because as you're moving eastwards, as you're rotating faster, the amount of centrifugal force you're feeling is going to increase, which means that the overall acceleration that you feel due to the sum of the centrifugal force and gravity is going to decrease slightly because the counteracting centrifugal force is going to increase, therefore the overall force is going to decrease. And this has some results that you can actually feel. First of all, you can actually measure that when you're moving at high speeds in a eastward direction, the weight of objects, for example, if you have a 1 kilogram test mass on a scale, the mass is actually going to decrease a little bit. And in the other direction, if you're moving westwards, the centrifugal force is going to decrease. Therefore, the overall force is going to increase a little bit, which means that this object will appear to be heavier because it actually is heavier for you in that situation. And you can actually measure that.
Yeah, well, once again, mate, I will call bullshit. I don't think you're able to measure that at all, simply because there is no motion of the Earth in the first place. The equator is not going at 1,040 miles per hour.
But wait a second. You would understand that this would be a nice way to actually prove that the Earth is spinning, and it would also be a way to prove at which angular speed the Earth would be spinning, right?
Well, no, because you've turned around and said that by going faster with the speed, you're actually reversing the centrifugal force somehow. Because I can't wrap my head around that, mate. I'm sorry.
It's quite easy to understand. It's quite easy to understand. You said before that when you're going westwards, basically you're turning faster than the planet below you. When you're going eastwards, you're turning faster than the planet below you, right?
Yeah, you're going that speed plus your own speed.
Okay, exactly. So what happens when you walk into the other direction, when you move westwards?
You're still going your own speed.
Yeah, you're going at a speed, but you're going at a lower speed than the planet, right?
Allegedly, yes, correct.
Okay, that means that first of all, the amount of centrifugal force that you have is going to decrease, correct?
How does that decrease? You're still spinning at the same rate.
No, you're spinning slower.
You're not spinning slower. The spin has remained the same. You're just moving across the spin.
No. The Earth is spinning at the same speed. That's correct, but you are spinning slower because you are moving in the opposite. Well, not in the opposite direction. In the opposite direction. You're moving in the opposite direction of the movement of the planet, which means that, for example, let's just say the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour eastwards, and you're moving at 100 miles per hour westwards. That means that your total speed is 900 miles per hour eastwards. Correct? You're just subtracting those two values.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
right.
Okay. Now the centrifugal force is directly dependent on your speed. That means that the centrifugal force is going to decrease when you're moving westwards.
Yeah, I still think that centrifugal force is what's pushing everything outwards up through your blood-brain barrier at the same speed.
Basically that is what it's doing.
Of what speed you're moving across it.
That is basically what it's doing. So let's just say the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour eastwards. What would be happening if you were to rush westwards at 1,000 miles per hour at the same speed? You wouldn't be rotating anymore, right?
Allegedly, yeah.
Okay. That means that at this point, at 1,000 kilometers per hour, moving westwards over a sphere that's moving 1,000 kilometers per hour eastward.
Sorry, I think you actually move 1,000.
Yeah, sorry. I always switch between miles and kilometers. I'm sorry. You're moving 1,000 miles per hour westwards. The Earth is moving below you 1,000 kilometers. Sorry, 1,000 miles, for fuck's sake. 1,000 miles per hour eastwards. Those two speeds are identical. Therefore, you're not rotating anymore. Correct?
No, actually, you're moving twice the speed. You actually have to be moving eastwards in order to appear to remain perfectly still, because the planet's traveling eastwards. So you have to move with the planet.
No. You have to move against it. If the planet is moving eastwards, that means if you're moving westwards, you're staying relative to it, or you're not rotating anymore. Right?
Yeah. Well, I suppose if you're using the friction of the Earth to say
forget about the friction of the Earth. You're just moving.
That works the complete opposite if you say you're in a flying vehicle. Now, if you're in a flying vehicle and you're moving 1,000 miles an hour eastwards, you're going with the spin of the Earth. Therefore, you're remaining still.
Yeah, but I'm saying wait, stop. We are in a scenario. The Earth is spinning eastwards. You are moving westwards. How you're moving is completely irrelevant. Whether you're in a plane or whether you're in a train is completely irrelevant. The effect of this? Can I please make my point?
Well, you're not making a point if you're getting it all wrong backwards.
No. I'm making a point. I just can't make it when you interrupt me all the time.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. You're moving in the opposite direction as the rotational speed of the Earth. Therefore, you're not rotating, which means that you will feel that the centrifugal force is going to decrease until you have matched exactly the speed at which the Earth is rotating. As soon as you move faster westwards, for example, 1,200 miles per hour, then the Earth is moving eastwards, those 1,000 miles per hour. And the sum of those means that you're moving at a speed of 200 miles per hour westwards over the Earth, which means that at this point, you are going to feel a centrifugal acceleration again. And
can you allow me then to point you out your error before you go any further, please?
Okay.
Let's assume then it's like a large conveyor belt, like on a large walkway like they have in the airport, those ones that move and they make you walk faster. If you're walking with the direction of the walkway, you're going much faster.
Correct.
If you go against it, you stay still.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. You're going against it. That's actually a good analogy. Let's use this. Okay.
Yeah, all right.
Let's just say the Earth is moving to the right. To the right, and you're moving to the left. Okay.
Yeah.
Earth is moving to the right at 1,000 miles per hour. You're moving to the left at 1,000 miles per hour. Therefore, you're standing still, right?
Yeah, but to move at 1,000 miles per hour is really, really difficult. So.
Well, but it's possible, right? Yeah. You realize we have the technology to do this.
Yeah, you're in a supersonic jet. You're breaking the sound barrier, and that will cause you to remain appearing perfectly still. Gotcha.
Okay. Now, what happens when you move faster to the left than the Earth is spinning? The Earth is spinning to the right. For example, the Earth is going at 1,000 miles per hour to the right. You're moving 1,200 miles per hour to the left. What's the overall effect?
Moving 1,200 miles per hour.
No. You said before that when you're at 1,000 miles per hour, moving to the left while the Earth is moving at the same speed to the right, you're standing still, right? Therefore, if you're moving to the left, 1,200 miles per hour, and the Earth is spinning to the right, 1,000 miles per hour, you're in total moving 200 miles per hour to the left, correct?
Correct.
Okay. That means that if you're doing this on the equator, think about a long conveyor belt that's going around the equator. Okay, in a stationary reference. That means that the Earth itself is a conveyor belt, and that one's moving to the left at 1,000 miles per hour. Yeah, sorry, to the right. For fuck's sake, to the right. That means that as soon as you run 1,000 miles per hour to the left, you're standing still, as seen from the outside, right?
I suppose technically you are standing still, but
okay, wait.
The ground beneath you is still racing away at that 1,000 miles an hour, though, isn't it?
Yeah, the Earth underneath is racing away. However, since you're not moving, you're not rotating at this point anymore, you will not feel a centrifugal acceleration
relative to the place you were. Yep, that's
no. I mean, in total.
I'm sorry, it is starting to do my head in a bit here.
That means that the only acceleration you feel will be the acceleration of gravity. Now, as you move further or quicker to the west, further to the left, you will actually start rotating in the opposite direction. Correct? Not relative to the planet, but relative to an outside observer.
Okay, yep.
Okay, that means that you feel, that the person running will feel again the centrifugal force. Correct?
Say again, how does this got anything to do with the centrifugal force if you're moving against the spin itself?
Yeah, because you're, at this point you're spinning in the opposite direction.
Yeah, you're virtually going backwards by going forwards, so to speak.
Yeah, pretty much, yes. That means that you can derive a graph on how much amount of centrifugal force you would expect on a spinning Earth that spins at a certain given rate. And this graph that you can derive is something you can test. Correct?
Yeah, but by the time you've taken up that speed in your hypersonic, supersonic jet to go that speed, you're doing something again like your centrifuge you're talking about earlier on, where you're applying an entirely different force than from what you would feel from the centrifugal force of the planet spinning in the first place. So you're counteracting what you claim to be a natural force with a completely unnatural force, which you couldn't really then use to measure anything accurately to prove you're on the outside surface of a spinning ball. Once again,
if you
apply a different force.
Can you see my screen?
Hang on, I'll click back on that again.
I'm showing a diagram right now.
Yes, I can see a screen there.
Okay,
yes.
So basically this is for a test mass of 10 kilograms. This is a diagram you would expect from the Earth-verse effect when the Earth is moving at 930 meters per second eastward.
Okay, and is this something that they've actually done, or is this what you've calculated as an expectation because of what you believe should be occurring?
Okay, so this graph here is theoretical. This is just calculated directly from what would you expect.
What you imagine
but
it would be.
If you take a look at the graph, you see that to the right. First of all, this graph is not symmetrical, which shows that the Earth is rotating in a given direction. You see that. Do you see this point here, 465 meters per second to the east?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Do you see that you would expect 1.02 newtons more? Wait, upward. Yeah, well, 1.02 newtons less in total for this test mass of 10 kilograms.
Allegedly, yeah, I can see how hypothetically that would. Yes.
Did you notice that those 465 meters per second are very close to the speed that an aircraft travels at cruising altitude?
No, I didn't really realize that's what it would be in meters per second. But that
actually, wait, let me check. No, stop. That's not correct. I was thinking in miles per hour. Sorry, let me just convert this. So that would be
plane's going 800 kilometers. per second divided by 6.
65 times
Divided by
3.6.
60.
Ah, stupid thing. What the fuck? I think my calculator just crashed. What the hell, Windows? Okay, 565. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay. 3.6. Okay, no, yeah, I was wrong. That's approximately the speed of sound here. Yeah, obviously it is. So that would be the speed of a supersonic aircraft. Let's just see where those 850 kilometers per hour would be by 3.6. There we go. So that's more correct. So at approximately 230, so here, this would be the cruising speed of an airplane right here. Do you see my mouse cursor? Oh, you muted yourself, man. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to have a quick break.
Okay. So yeah, I was wrong by a factor of 2, but whatever. The argument still stands. So the cruising speed of an aircraft at cruising altitude would be approximately here, which means that for a test mass of 10 kilograms, you would expect let's just say 0.4 newtons more upwards, meaning that the object would get lighter by 0.4 newtons. And this is something you can actually measure.
Yeah, okay. Well, can I explain that then for you?
Huh?
Since this is something that it can also be explained in a completely different way, and that is the fact that weight is also determined by the amount of air pressure pushing down on top of it. So when you're in an aeroplane up higher with less atmosphere above you, less atmospheric pressure, you would also weigh less, which is why
this is not about the airplane itself.
Things do weigh less.
This is not about the airplane itself. It's about an object inside the airplane, which is in a pressurized container where the air pressure stays approximately constant over the time of the flight. I mean, you can set up an experiment to actually do this, and it's not relevant on the actual air pressure outside because you can do this experiment at any altitude.
I guess if it's pressurized, yeah, and you're moving at that speed.
No, even if you were in a vacuum, it would make no difference.
Seriously?
Yes.
Would you say that a mass weighs more or less in a vacuum?
No. I'm saying compared to it standing still. You can do this experiment. Let's just say you have a moving object inside your vacuum, okay? And you have it on that moving object, you have your scale, and on that scale is the test mass. Okay? You measure it once it's standing still, and then you accelerate it to a certain speed, for example, those 230 meters per second. And then you measure how the actual weight of the object on that scale in newtons changes. So the air pressure is not a factor because the air pressure would be identical from it standing still to it being accelerated.
Okay, that's a good point. But then what about the fact that the device you're using to measure it depends upon it being still itself to give an accurate measurement, and that once you start moving it, then the very mechanics that it uses to measure the weight of a device are being upset because they're being pushed forward in a different direction, and so they're not measuring the true accurate weight of something until it comes to rest.
We're talking about constant motion here. We're not talking about measuring it while it's accelerating. As soon as it's not accelerating anymore, there will be no difference of it measuring the weight of the object while it's moving constantly or while it's standing still. And actually, the device will have no way of telling which one of the two states it's currently being.
Well, that's why I asked the question, because I think that's open to debate as to whether or not the measuring device itself is accurate while it's in motion.
Yeah, again, it has no way of knowing whether it's in motion or not. It would just maybe know when it's accelerating or not. But I'm saying measure this at a constant speed while the device is not accelerating. Measure it at 0 kilometers per hour movement, then accelerate it while doing no measurements, then measure it at 100 meters per second, 200 meters per second, and so on and so forth, but not while it's accelerating.
Well, why not do both? Check it while it's accelerating as well, just to see.
I mean, you could do this as well, just to check on how the acceleration affects your readings.
I'm saying
But
that
if the device
motion
is not,
itself,
if the device is not designed to actually work while it's accelerating, either you might
the
break
motion
something.
itself of being in motion I would just imagine in its own right automatically not register as heavy because of the motion,
No.
and therefore the scale, which is calibrated to work at a standing still place, will also not be able to detect it being as heavy. So it's sort of like 6 to 1, half a dozen the other. You're still going to get the same result, but it doesn't mean anything.
Do you weigh less in a train than you do while you're standing still?
No, you don't. That's the whole point. But if you were to measure yourself with scales, you might get different results. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but I'm just saying that there could be a reason why when you're in motion, the scales won't detect the weight as accurately as it would.
That's actually a much easier way to actually show that what you are suggesting is not the case. For example, by repeating this experiment once in an east-west direction and once in a north-south direction, because you will only get this effect when you're dealing with east-west motion. When you're directly moving north-south, you will not see this.
Okay, well, I'd like to see somebody actually prove that. And
you can actually do this with much lower speeds by measuring the time it takes for a pendulum in one of those devices to swing. The reason being that can you imagine that so there's a formula that describes the motion of pendulums, right? Basically, that the time it takes for the pendulum to swing once is only dependent on two things, namely the length of the cable on which it's dangling, and second of all, the acceleration which it's feeling, for example, gravity.
Due to latitude, obviously. So you're faster at the equator, slower towards the poles, right?
No.
No? So it's not proving the spin of the Earth then?
Wait. No, wait. The thing is that the acceleration which the pendulum is feeling is dependent on two things. First of all, it's dependent on gravity, and it's also dependent on the Earth effect. Basically, the centrifugal acceleration and gravity add up in different ways because when you're moving eastwards, for example, as I said, you will feel more centrifugal acceleration. When you're moving westwards, you're going to feel less. And the sum of the centrifugal acceleration and gravity, that's the actual amount of acceleration you plug into the formula for the pendulum, which means that from the time it takes for a known pendulum with a known length to swing, you can directly derive the accelerating force that's acting on it. And you will see that the period it takes for it to swing will be different depending on whether you're moving east or westwards. And the nice thing about this is that it's rather accurate because obviously timing one swing
constantly, right?
What?
So you're saying when it swings back one direction, it's going faster than when it's spinning the other direction?
No. I'm saying that if you're moving westwards, for example, it's gonna swing faster all the time. Just a little bit. You will not be able to measure this for one swing, but if you have the pendulum running long enough, for example, half an hour or something, and you count the amounts of swings it's doing, you will be able to measure a difference between it when it's moving westwards, when it's standing still, and when it's moving eastwards. And that is directly a result of the rotation of the planet.
And so if it's swinging north-south, you will
notice
it one way faster than the other way.
No, wait.
You will see it sort of wobbling because it's moving westward.
Stop. There's a misunderstanding here. The pendulum itself is moving on a vessel, for example, I don't know, a car, ship, whatever. The pendulum itself is moving west or eastwards. The direction in which the pendulum is swinging is completely irrelevant to the experiment.
No, well, I'm just wondering, we're talking about a fixed pendulum now. Yeah.
No.
It's fixed to a fixed building.
Wait, stop. It doesn't matter if it's fixed or whether it can move in all directions. The important thing is that the pendulum itself, the entire assembly, is moving east or westwards. In which direction the pendulum, the weight itself is swinging, whether it's swinging north, south, east, west, doesn't matter for this experiment. Because the acceleration that's acting on the device itself, the acceleration that's acting on the test mass, on the weight on the bottom of the pendulum.
I didn't realize you were talking about a pendulum swinging on a moving device.
That one is directly dependent on the movement of the entire assembly. just
okay.
want to take that away. So
let's go
that's
back
an experiment you can actually do. This is an experiment that was actually performed on some exploration vessels, if I remember correctly. They had a pendulum and basically counted the numbers of swings in a certain given time frame, and therefore derived their speed relative to the surface of the planet, which is kind of
Okay,
awesome.
well, that sounds really convincing. That's very, very informative with all that information there. What about then? We'll get back into your fixed
this is a rather easy experiment to do, because you don't require high speeds. All you need is you need to know how your pendulum behaves when you're standing still relative to the ground. And that's something that's very easy to measure. Obviously, you just swing it, let it swing, and just count the amounts of swings it does in half an hour or whatever. And then compare that to the same pendulum. Take the same pendulum and repeat the experiment when you're moving. And basically, what this gives you.
A question now to do with
wait. Let me just finish my point, and you can ask me anything. And when you're done doing this experiment, right? When you measured several of those measurements, let's just say you're moving at 20 miles per hour to the west, you're moving at 40 miles per hour to the west. Directly from that, you can derive the amount of centrifugal acceleration you felt, or the pendulum felt, more or less. And directly from that, you can derive the rotational speed of the planet. Okay, now it's your turn.
Well, okay. I'm sure you believe what you just said, but what I'm trying to get back to then, let's go back to our standard Foucault's pendulum that is attached to a fixed building, which is attached to the rotating Earth, as you believe. And you say that the swinging of this pendulum is how we detect the motion of the Earth. So my question is, it's just a simple question. If the pendulum is swinging directly north and south, is that going to swing differently from if it's swinging east to west, due to the fact that you say the Earth is spinning at this 1,000 miles per hour in the east direction?
That's the entire point of the Foucault pendulum. The Foucault pendulum must be allowed to swing in all directions.
Yeah.
Because the actual plane of its swinging will change at a certain rate, and that certain rate is only dependent on the rotational speed of the planet, and it's only dependent on your latitude.
But it's got nothing to do with the actual motion of the Earth spinning in one direction.
Yes, it does. Think about the plane of the pendulum itself being fixed in space while the ground is rotating away underneath it. You can do a similar.
But it's fixed to the ground.
Okay. Do me a favor. Let's just say you have a merry-go-round, right?
Sure.
Okay. And you put a pendulum on this merry-go-round, which means that the top is attached to the merry-go-round in some way, and there's a weight dangling down from it, and you just start this pendulum, so it starts swinging. Okay. Now you give that merry-go-round a push in any given direction, and you're still standing on the merry-go-round. What do you see in regards to the pendulum?
Yeah, I'm really not sure. I've never done such an experiment. That would be quite an interesting.
Okay, but what you're gonna see, because that's pretty much what the Foucault pendulum is doing. Since you're standing on the merry-go-round, from your vantage point, it will look like the plane in which the pendulum is swinging will rotate.
It's just backwards and forwards on its same left to right motion.
Yeah, exactly. It itself is only rotating backwards and forwards, but you, as the observer, are rotating around the pendulum. Do you understand that?
Oh, I thought the pendulum was attached to your merry-go-round with you.
Yeah, but it can still swing freely in all directions. Just take a look at my screen.
You would be still appearing to be going backwards and forwards, unless you swung it circularly as well, and then you're applying another force.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so the red line, that's the pendulum. Do you see that it's only swinging backwards and forwards?
Sorta, yeah. It still seems to be spinning with the whole entire thing.
Let's just say that you stand at one of those 6 corners, for example, here. Okay. Basically, what you're gonna see is that you're gonna think that the plane of the pendulum moving is changing its orientation towards you. right? Because now you're seeing it moving in this direction, and now you're seeing it pretty much head on, swinging away from you and then back to you again. And then a little bit later, it will swing in the opposite direction from your vantage point. And this is exactly what the Foucault pendulum does. The observer of the Foucault pendulum is standing on the rotating reference frame, but the Foucault pendulum itself, the weight on the string, is only moving in one direction. However, the observer is rotating around it. And
well, that's a good explanation.
This is an easy way to actually see that the ground underneath you is rotating, because the inertia alone of the pendulum will keep it in its plane. It will only swing in that one plane. However, you are not.
That, but if that plane is still more or less moving in a straight line, so it's making like this large circle east to west, because the Earth has its curvature as well. It's not this flat surface that you're talking about.
Yeah, obviously this is more complicated. This is just a very simplification. Yeah. Basically, what's going to happen is the amount of change from the reference frame of the observer to the reference frame of the pendulum, that difference is going to get less the closer you get to the equator.
Okay, well, can I take this now to the next step where I was leading to all along, with as far as swinging north-south or swinging east-west, as far as the pendulum was concerned? Because as far as I do know, that the Foucault pendulum ends up going around in a complete circle. So at times it's east-west, other times north-south, and everything in between. But let's take it another step then and assume your spinning ball model with the equator going at the 1,040 miles per hour and aeroplanes flying north to south. Are they flying north to south, or must they be going at some extreme angle to account for the spin? And how is it possible for a plane going 500 miles per hour to land on a surface moving east to west 1,000 miles per hour? Can you give me a good explanation for that?
Yeah, basically it's because the atmosphere is rotating with the planet.
Gotcha. Right. Yep. Sure. Yeah. That makes so much nonsense.
Yes. No. Actually, think about it. It makes complete sense, because let's just say that the what do you think happens on the surface of the airplane? There's interaction, there's friction between the airplane and the air around it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to fly.
It's forcing itself through the air. That's right, to gain lift.
Yes. And for example, let's just say that you have. Hey, let's just say that you had this 500 mile per hour wind from one side. The airplane would be forced to move with that wind until it has reached the speed of that wind.
So you're saying there is no such thing as north-south flight. It is actually always going at a great angle, also going 1,000 miles per hour eastwards with the rotation of the Earth.
Yes. The entire thing is rotating with the Earth, yes.
Right, and so what about the 66,600 mile per hour orbital rate around the sun? What does it do with that?
Obviously, wait a second. We need to deal with the accelerations that are in play here. The speeds themselves are not that relevant actually they're completely irrelevant when you're moving through a vacuum, because there's no resistant force, because there's no drag between the Earth and the vacuum around it. The only thing that could influence flights in this case would be the centrifugal acceleration that the entire Earth would feel. And if you actually do the calculation, it's so minute that it doesn't do anything.
Once you've left the surface of the Earth, right, you've lost that initial inertia. Like if you jumped off a speeding train and fell down the embankment, you're not going to keep moving the same speed you were going with the speeding train. You slow down quite quickly and rapidly and start decelerating immediately. Now, if the plane takes off from the Earth and it turns around and changes direction, how is it using the inertia it took off with to continue going 1,000 miles an hour, twice the speed of its actual speed, in the opposite direction?
How does it? Well, first of all, regarding your train example, why do you think you're slowed down? You're slowed down because the wind is pushing you, because the outside air is standing still and you're moving through it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, the entire Earth has this air hull around it called atmosphere, which
so it's red. But
which is moving with the Earth, meaning that the entire atmosphere is moving with the Earth, which means that from an observer of the Earth, it looks like it's standing still. Do you understand that?
I understand that makes no logical sense whatsoever, because air needs to be contained in order to be able to move with something moving through it. I mean, it makes no sense. The Earth should be moving through its own atmosphere constantly and leaving its own atmosphere behind instantly, because it's traveling at phenomenal speeds through a void with no container. How the hell?
but don't you
can it drag
understand that
around?
the air is doing the same thing? The air is also moving at the same speed in the same direction.
It's not. It's taking off in multiple directions, in multiple different speeds, that you couldn't possibly claim that the atmosphere is actually moving at. If you really use some critical thought here, you really believe that it's not only spinning 1,040 miles an hour plus just in order to appear perfectly still, it's also going to 66,600 miles per hour in order to appear perfectly still. It's also going to 514,000 miles per hour with the sun in order to appear perfectly still, just so that planes don't have to take any of those motions into account. That's sheer and utter nonsense. It really
again, the speeds don't make any difference whatsoever.
Why not? If they don't exist. So why believe in them? Why believe in non-existent things if they're non-existent?
We can measure them. You understand that, right? We can measure the rotational speed of the orbital speed of the Earth around the sun. We can measure the orbital speed of the moon around the Earth.
You can measure the speed of the sun going around us and fool yourself into believing that because things are relative, that it's the speed of the Earth moving. But all you're doing is measuring the speed of the sun going 1,000 miles an hour above us.
Do you understand that red and blue shift are a thing? Do you know what red and blue shift are?
Not off the top of my head, no. I've heard the term quite a bit, but I haven't really looked into it.
Okay. Do you know the sound that an ambulance makes when it drives past you?
Yeah.
Okay, do you know that there's a change in pitch of the siren? As soon as it's passing you, the pitch is getting lower, and before that it was higher?
Yeah, I know. It's sort of, you hear it approaching better than you hear it fading away, yeah.
No, not only in terms of amplitude, in terms of loudness, but also in terms of the pitch. The pitch is higher when it's the pitch of the siren is higher when it's coming towards you than it is when it's going away from you.
I'm not sure. I haven't heard that before.
Well, this sound, don't you know that?
No, I just know it sets the dogs off next door and they start howling when the ambulance goes rolling past, and I hear their pitch, but I haven't said I've noticed the difference in pitch. Maybe
you can actually hear that quite quickly. Obviously, the bigger the speed difference, or the bigger the speed of the ambulance is, the better. Over here, for example, on our highways, when you drive on a highway and there's a ambulance coming in the opposite direction from the opposite lane, passing you, you actually hear the pitch difference quite quickly. Now, that is called Doppler effect. Basically, what's happening is that from your vantage point, it looks like the sound waves that are coming away from the siren are compressed into one another, which gives them a higher pitch. When the object is moving towards you, and when it's moving away from you, the sound waves are elongated.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Okay, now from that, you can pretty much directly determine how fast that object is going, right? But basically, the pitch change depends on how fast the object is going. Therefore, if you know the pitch change, which is something you can measure, you know how far the object is going.
I guess that sounds reasonable, yeah.
Okay, the same applies for light. As sound is waves, sound is waves, light is also waves. Now, there are different kind of waves, but they also light also behaves like waves, which means that if you're moving closer to an object, or if an object is moving in your direction at high speeds, you can actually see that the color, well, because basically different colors of light have different wavelengths, and you can kind of compare the wavelength of the light, or the color of the light, to the pitch of the sound, right? Those are approximately the same thing, which means that you can actually see when you have a good spectrometer, you can actually see that the color of light of something moving towards you at high speeds will be different than something moving away from you at the same speed. And that's something we can use on stars. When a star is moving towards us, or when we are moving towards a star, its light will be appearing slightly more bluish than when it's standing still relatively to us. And on the opposite, when the star is moving away from us, it's going to look a little bit more red than when you're standing still towards it, relative to it.
Yeah, but we have photographic evidence to say that the stars all move as one body, basically around Polaris. So, how are you saying it's moving towards and away if they're just circling around that fixed center point?
Yeah, I'm coming towards it. So this fixed center point, that's because of the rotation of the planet. But what I want to talk to you about is basically the rotation of the Earth around the sun. Okay.
Well, I believe the sun goes around the Earth. So
wait a second. And I can show you that I can show you a simple mechanism on how this is wrong and why you're wrong. So basically, think about the Earth rotating around the sun once every year. Okay?
Yep, that's the general consensus.
Okay, now think about a star that's very close to the ecliptic. That's close to the ecliptic. That means that once every year, you are moving towards it a little bit, and half a year later, you're moving away from it a little bit. Do you understand that?
Well, I don't actually understand that at all, because from my experience looking at the stars, which I've paid particular attention to these last few years since trying to work out if we could possibly be on a flat Earth, when I look out to the Southern Cross, which I see it's actually directly outside my front door every night, which is quite convenient. If I walk down the hill and I compare it towards a fixed telegraph pole, it is always in the same place. Now, the angle it appears does change, which shows that they're all moving as one body, but they're not moving in position. If we're on the other side of the sun every 6 months looking 180 degrees in the complete opposite direction, which is what nighttime should be doing when you're on the other side of the sun looking the other way, why are all the stars also conveniently going around the sun with the Earth and remaining in the same constellations the whole time, just to give this insignificant little tiny space rock the same constellations constantly for thousands of years? How does that work?
Okay, there are multiple things here. First of all, the constellations are not they are changing over time, right? To understand this,
because they're not.
Wait a second, please. First of all, we can directly observe the movement of the stars over time. Closest stars typically appear to be moving faster than further stars that are further away. Take a picture of the stars in 1 year, and then take a picture of the same region of the sky with the same camera 50 years later, and you might see a noticeable difference. With the eye and with simple optics, this is rather hard to do. But with telescopes, it's actually no problem whatsoever to measure how much the stars are moving relative to what's
Sorry, mate, but I'm going to call bullshit on that one. At 100%, the constellations have remained the same constellations for thousands of years.
Okay, can you do me a favor and Google Barnard star?
I don't need to Google one particular star. There are wandering stars. We know there are wandering stars. There might be more of them than what we've thought of in the past. What stars really are is still an unknown thing. And I noticed somebody even mentioned in the comment.
Can I maybe get back to my point that I was making earlier because it wasn't finished yet?
Yeah, go ahead.
But basically, when you have stars that are close to the ecliptic, meaning that they are very close to the plane in which the Earth is moving to the sun, that means that once every year, let's just pick one star, right? Once every year, for a period of a few months, the Earth is moving towards that star, and half a year later, it's moving away from the same star. Now, as I said earlier, light behaves similar to sound in that it's a wave, and the speed of u in relation to the object that's producing the light will have influences on the frequency of the light and therefore on the color of the light. Now we can actually measure this. We can see that when we pick any particular star on the ecliptic, we can measure that for a certain period of a time within a year, its light will be slightly blue shifted, and then half a year later, it will be slightly red shifted. Now, as with the sound, meaning that as you can determine the speed of the object or the speed of u towards the object by only knowing the change in pitch, you can do the same with light, meaning that when you know the difference of the red and blue shift, basically how much bluer the light looks compared to how much redder it looks half a year later, you can directly determine your speed in comparison to the object. And that speed that you measure is exactly what we expect for the orbital motion of the Earth around the Sun. And this is not explainable by a stationary Earth. And especially not by a flat Earth.
Okay, well, I will just have to disagree with you on that one, because I believe that the nature of light is very poorly understood, and that in fact the nature of light itself doesn't even exist until it reaches our atmosphere. And our atmosphere being a constant height, but also of varying degrees of gases and temperature and so forth, that's what gives the stars their little bit of different sparkle and so on that you're seeing, and it has nothing to do with their actual distance whatsoever. And it's the same with the sun itself. The sun itself being an apparition created by the atmosphere, the moment it reaches a certain height of our atmosphere, that it creates the apparition that we see. And so therefore, that is why a person from a completely different part of the plane at the same time might be looking up at the same sun, but seeing a completely different apparition, because they're seeing it this part of the atmosphere, while the sun might technically be way up somewhere else higher. So everything to do with the atmosphere affects the way we see and get light in the first place. And you can easily prove this, even if you still believe you live on the spinning space ball. You can prove that that is the case with the sun, that the sun creates the atmosphere, so the sun creates the atmosphere creates the sunlight, because otherwise we wouldn't have nighttime at all. The sun would still be this distant ball 93 million miles away, creating light everywhere. But because we have the atmosphere capturing the sunlight and glowing as a result of being electrostimulated by the sun, that is why we have daytime. And you couldn't explain that the tiny shadow of the Earth is sufficient to block out this massive, massive sun and create nighttime across half the visible universe for the other half of the spinning ball. It has to be a property of the atmosphere interacting with the sun to create light in the first place. And then when the sun is no longer interacting with the atmospheric gases stop glowing, and that is how starlight becomes visible to us. Not because...
No, that's just no. You realize that what night basically is for fuck's sake.
It's being in the shadow.
Yeah, but basically it's you're in the shadow of the Earth, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And that means that approximately half of the Earth is in shadow all the time and half of it is illuminated all the time. Correct?
That's the theory, yep.
Yeah, I mean, just take any spherical object, just take a basketball or football or whatever, and shine a light on it with a flashlight or with a torch or whatever from, I don't know, 50 meters away. You will see that 50% of it is illuminated and the rest of it isn't. And the Earth behaves in exactly the same way.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Except,
I mean, what reason
some places get 17 hours of sunlight a day.
Yeah.
Some places get 0.
On average, everybody gets half a day, 12 hours. The reason why the daylight time changes over the course of the year is basically because the plane of the rotation is not identical to the plane of the orbit.
No, it's called the tilt. I do understand your globular model pretty well, and I know you say it's because of the tilt, and that somehow this puts the North Polar region into about 2 months of perpetual twilight or darkness, and
depends on how you define it. Depends on how you define it. On the Arctic Circle, on the Arctic Circle, it's exactly 1 day when there's 24-hour sunlight, and the further you get to the North Pole, the longer those periods will get. Where on the North Pole, you actually have exactly half a year of sunlight and then half a year of night.
I know it balances out.
Night is relative because the sun will at that point will always be directly on top or below the horizon.
And yet Antarctica resembles nothing like the Arctic Circle whatsoever.
Yes,
it's far more unknown.
The same way.
No, it's far more unknown. It is actually some of the coldest temperatures recorded on Earth perpetually. It doesn't really have a summer at all. There's no definite proof. I've seen lots of faked proof of the 24-hour sun in Antarctica. I've never seen any definite proof to say we get a 24-hour sun in Antarctica.
I think we actually might have somebody in the side chat who was in Antarctica during the Antarctic summer.
Yeah, well, I've heard of people saying that they've spent like 9 months down there and it's all darkness the whole time, but they never needed a torch because even here on certain nights when I go out on a moonless night, Venus is actually so bright, it works as a really good light source that I can walk through the dark forests without I never use an artificial light. I walk through some pretty dark and crazy places sometimes, but usually there's enough starlight to still be able to see. So when your eyes adjust to somewhere like in Antarctica where there's no daylight most of the time, that is why you don't need a torch, but there is no sunlight. That's why it's freezing bloody cold the whole entire time.
Actually, there's two things. There's two things here that you have to take into account. First of all, when it comes to those polar nights, they're actually not completely dark. The reason being that the sun is relatively close below the horizon.
It's in Antarctica, but not in Antarctica.
Yeah,
There's not enough research
yes, in
done
Antarctica. In Antarctica as well. When you're at the same latitude, south as north, you will get the same effect. The thing is just that when you actually take a look at where the actual human population is, they are on average much closer to the Arctic than they're on the Antarctic.
Well,
and if you check, wait a sec, can I please make my point? When you actually take a look at where most settlements in Antarctica are, they're actually further north than most settlements in the Arctic are south. That means that the polar nights that most people get to see in Antarctica are not that extreme. Therefore, the angle below the horizon of the sun will be lower. Therefore, on average, they will not be as dark as in Antarctica. But when it's sitting directly on the North and South Pole, they will behave exactly identical. Second of all, regarding the temperatures, that's mostly because Antarctica is actually full of glaciers. There's like, I think, 3 to 4 kilometers in some places of glacier, which means that the heat of the Earth actually irradiates away into the atmosphere much more easily. And yeah, that's why
it's actually a giant landmass according to the globe model.
Yes, it is a giant landmass, but it's
Australia, and the landmass itself is better at containing heat than, say, the frozen ice mass you say is in the Arctic Circle. So,
first of all, you realize
on the equidistant map, just for an example, since that's the closest we've got to an accurate map, we know that most of the landmass is concentrated in the center, which is why when the sun is furthest from us above the flat planar Earth, because it spirals up to create the summer in the far north and winter down here in the south, the direct sunlight through the least amount of atmosphere is what gives it its summer, and the thermal mass of more land mass allows it to have a relatively mild summer. It's still going to get hot, but it's nothing like the summers we get here in the south. And the reason our summers are not as severely extreme as you would expect, because the sun has descended downwards and appears to go outwards, southwards, it's because it's mostly ocean and it's surrounded by the giant freezer of Antarctica. So it sort of balances out, which is why you northern hemispherians have been allowed to get away with believing we live on a globe for the last 500 years, up to 2,500 years, depending on who you ask. But you will find that most people, their greatest argument is we don't have to prove it's a globe because we've known it for thousands of years. I'll tell you what, it's 2019 now, and we people, especially here in the outer side of the equator, have gotten wise to your wily ways and saying, there's no spin, there's no curvature. We are not living on the upside down side of a ball. It is flat and stationary because of the nature of water. And then we have to understand the nature of the sun logically and interpret it correctly, as opposed to your spinning spaceball model that you've been fooling the world with for 2,500 years.
Okay, I think we want to wrap this up very soon because we're in now 2.5 hours and I need to go out. So I would like to ask you one last question, namely, you are in the Southern Hemisphere. How do you explain the Southern Celestial Pole?
I don't explain the Southern Celestial Pole. I told you, I see the Southern Cross in the same place.
But you do see this. You do see that the Southern Cross is rotating around a pole, right?
No, I see the Southern Cross moving westwards around the sky all night long. And so by the time it's coming up in the morning, you see it in the far west, which means it's moved all the way over to the west, which is where Western Australia is. And because of its height, that's where, of course, then the people in South Africa are going to start being able to see it because it's up so high. The world isn't quite as big as they've led us to believe by going these ever-increasing concentric circles around Polaris. Once you hit the equator, of course, they go pear-shaped, so the distances aren't entirely accurate. But yeah, the whole lot is moving around Polaris, and that is why then it appears over South Africa. It keeps on going around South America, back to New Zealand, back to us at dusk again, and they're all moving as one body around Polaris. The reason it appears to be going the opposite direction is because when you put your back to the centre and you look at them, they are appearing to go the opposite direction, but they are not going around a southern celestial pole. I can guarantee you.
So you don't think there's a southern celestial pole?
Hmm?
You don't think there's a southern celestial pole?
I don't think so.
Okay, no. Then do me a favor. Next time it's nighttime and you have good visibility, look southwards at an elevation of, I don't know where exactly you are in Australia, maybe 65 degrees from above the horizon, approximately, I guess. Maybe
well, I told you,
degrees. I don't know. I would have to know your exact location. But just do me a favor. Take a camera, point that southwards 50, 60, 70, 50 or 60 degrees over the horizon, and snap a few snapshots over the course of the night. Just make sure that you can see the individual stars. Because I guarantee that you will see a point where everything else is rotating around. It's not as bright as the polar star for obvious reasons, because there just doesn't happen to be a bright star right at the rotational center.
Yes, but all the same, this is one thing that I also say to other people that believe in the celestial poles and all the rest, is that if you can attach a camera to a spinning ball, this ball has to be hanging from a string, okay? Not fixed to a equatorial mount or anything like that. It has to be attached to a ball with a camera on it and spin that and have it fixed on a distant point and make everything go in perfect circles around it, as photographers constantly do from all sorts of latitudes towards Polaris. It cannot be done. It is physically impossible, because the very same reason you say that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west is because of the spin of the Earth. The stars should be doing the same thing, but they don't. They're not. They're spinning around a central point.
Yes, the ones
completely
that are close to the ecliptic behave exactly like the sun. That's the point of them. The reason why you can see the celestial poles most of the time is because they have the direction from which the light is coming from is pretty much perpendicular towards the sun all the time, which means that there's no time when the sun is very close to them from our field of view. Which is why you cannot see some. Which is why the zodiac cycle itself is a thing, because
on your model ball that I'm talking about, where you can fix a camera and point it up towards the top of the string, because that's going to be your pole point, right? So it's got to be somehow on the outside edge tilted to capture that angle. You should technically be able to face another one at the bottom of this ball at another point directly opposite, which would be the southern polar star. The equivalent of, and you should be able to capture this 2 times from 2 different cameras and show everything else appearing to move in perfect circles around those 2 points. It's never been done. If somebody can do that and prove it, show how it's actually done, I'll start to consider a little bit differently. But I've been putting that challenge out now for years, and people run and hide. They do not like that challenge whatsoever. So
okay, yeah, that's actually very easy to do.
I'd like to apply yourself to prove that we live on a spinning ball. You could convince somebody like myself if you could do that. I just don't think it's possible, because we know what's going to happen. Even if you could fix on a fixed point in the distance, it's going to take elliptical paths because of the size of the ball. And the bigger the ball, which the Earth is obviously, then the bigger the elliptical path should be around the fixed point in the center. But when we do it with Polaris, they all make perfect circles. When they do it with Octantis, all I see is faked little bits of images where they show one little piece going for like a minute, 2 minutes tops, and then they stitch that back onto itself and leave a little fixed artificial front in front of it to show this is them going around. But if you see a shooting star in it, you see the same shooting star repeated over and over and vanishing again to show that they're faking it, because they have to fake it because it's not going around a fixed southern celestial pole.
Okay. With that, I'd like to end this hangout right now because I really have to head out. Would you be in for another one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I've enjoyed it actually. It's good to discuss stuff.
Okay, so for the people in the side chat, I'm not gonna open this hangout to the public right now. Meaning, usually Flat Earth, Aussie Jesus, or Russ. Usually in the end of my hangout, I just invite a few friends to talk about whatever has been discussed. But since I really have to head out right now, I'm just gonna push this towards our next hangout, which I just think we're just gonna send a few emails and make out a new time for that, I guess. Sometime next week, I don't know. Oh no, next weekend I'm not available. I'll be down in Munich. But some other time we'll surely find one.
Maybe somebody else would like to invite me on. I've usually got my Sundays free, and it's Saturday evening now, 9:34 p.m.
Sunday might actually work for me. I'm not here on Saturday. Well, not tomorrow Sunday, but next week Sunday. But Sunday? Yeah, we will find some. We will find some time.
My Sundays are generally free, so yeah, that's good.
So whatever, yeah, since you're the guest, you have the final word. So just give a final statement if you want, and then yeah.
Yeah, sure. No, just like I say, I've always been an open-minded person towards all sorts of things, whether it be conspiracies or whatever. And usually the way I get into any sort of thing is by attempting to debunk it. And so when I first heard about Flat Earth, I thought, naturally, like most people, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I know we live on a spinning ball. I know how the whole solar system and everything works. I know the tides are pulled around by the moon and all sorts of stuff. But then when I really, really sat down and critically thought about it and applied some sort of logic to try and understanding, well, what if it's not curvature causing the cutoff points of things in the distance? What if it's the reason the sun gets obscured as it gets much further away is simply because we're so low to the ground, and that when it's so far away, it stops illuminating our atmosphere. And that's why we get at twilight, not because we're on a spinning ball blocking the sunlight and putting us into darkness for the whole entire night. I just think that everything that could possibly be explained to prove we live on a spinning ball has just as logical, if not a better explanation for being on a stationary planar Earth where water obeys what we see and observe water always do. It does not conform to the curvature of the ball. The land is not lower down around the curve somewhere in the distance. It's obviously a fact that we live on a stationary planar Earth, and it sort of makes it a very unique situation because of that, because of the uniqueness of it. It's not a flying disc in outer space, as people keep liking to claim. It is the very physical bottom of the known universe where everything finds its place according to density and buoyancy. And that's why the lights are higher up, because they're not dense. They have buoyancy in some sort of other realm that we're not privy to. Then we have the light of our atmosphere, we have our water, and we have our solid land. And this is it, baby. It might be potentially infinite beyond Antarctica. We don't know, because we're pretty much imprisoned by the physical constraints of Antarctica. Apart from that, thanks for the discussion. I've enjoyed it. Cheers.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for joining, and for the 74 people who are still watching, thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.